Everybody's connecting to audio. Great. Well, hello, welcome all to the Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Fund Grants Committee meeting. We're going to do things slightly differently today. Just at the beginning of the meeting, we're going to start with just going over our public participation guidelines and then doing introductions. And then we have Commissioner Hardesty is joining us for this meeting, and we're going to turn it over to her after that to make some opening remarks before we get into the agenda. So just as a reminder of the public participation guidelines, the chat box is open for introductions. And so for those of you who are members of the public, if you can put your name, if you have an organizational affiliation, and if you have pronouns that you would like to list in there, you can put that in there now. And if you're interested in providing public comment, please also indicate that interest in the chat box. The raise hand function on the call is for committee members to use only. And outside of the public comment period, the microphones for members of the public are muted. Also, just a reminder that this meeting is being recorded and that there is closed captioning available, and you can find that by going to the menu bar on your Zoom and then just looking over to those three little dots that say more under them. And if you hover over that, then go down and you can see view full transcript, and that's how you can see the live transcription of this meeting. So I'm going to start with introductions, and I think we'll start with committee members and then move to staff. So we'll start with Jeffrey.
Jeffrey Moreland, committee member, he, him.
Megan.
Megan Horst, committee member, she, her.
Faith.
Hello, everyone. Faith, excuse me, Faith Graham, committee member, she, her.
Andrea.
Hi, folks. Andrea Hamburg, committee member, she, her.
Maria.
Maria Sippin, she, they, committee member.
Shanice.
Good evening, Shanice Clark, she, they, committee member.
Michael.
Michael Eden Hill, committee member, he, him.
Rainfeast.
Rainfeast Genitino Viatoro, committee member, he, him.
And Robin.
Hi, everybody. Sorry I'm a little late. Robin Wang, committee member, he, him.
Thanks. Now we'll move on to staff, and we'll start with Janet.
Good evening, everybody. Janet Hammer, PCEF startup team, she, her.
James.
Hi, everybody. My name is James Valdez, PCEF startup team staff, and he, him pronouns.
And I'm Katie Lister, PCEF startup team, she, her pronouns. Sam.
Sam Barrasso, PCEF startup team, he, him.
And Sam, you want to introduce members of the public?
Let me turn it to Commissioner Hardesty to introduce yourself, then I'll go to members of the public.
Okay.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Joanne Hardesty. I currently serve as a commissioner on Portland City Council.
Thank you. All right. And as far as members of the public, and remember for you all, just enter your name, any organization affiliation in the chat box. Start off with Anissa Pemberton, PCEF Coalition Coordinator at the Coalition of Communities of Color, they, them. We've got you noted, Anissa, as far as public comment. Zakir Hakim, Eastside Solar Minority Business Enterprise, he, him. Scott Sander, Exceed Enterprises, he, him. Deidre Schutz, Nutrition Garden RX, she, her. Jenny Hall, she, her, Energy Trust of Oregon. David Radke, IBW 48, Business Rep, he, him. Brandy Ramos. Emily Davis, she, her, Kelly Nonprofit Consulting. Daniela Chansey, Relate Northwest, she, her. Randy Ramos, RJ Ramos Construction Electric Company, thank you. And Angela Providelli, she, her, BPS staff. And we've got Charles Slaughter, he, him, teacher. Thank you. With that, go ahead. If there's anyone else, we'll catch them in a little bit. But with that, I'll turn it over. I know Commissioner Hardesty, you've got a few words you want to share. We'll turn the floor to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Sam, and thank you all for allowing me to crash your meeting tonight. I wanted to come and first tell you how appreciative I am of the committee's work, of your diligence, your commitment to being intentional, and making sure that the Portland Clean Energy Fund benefits the people who it's supposed to benefit. And I was talking to Sam, and I told Sam that I thought I would share this story with you as a story of caution as we move forward. I last week attended a meeting that was facilitated by the Clean Energy Fund of Oregon. And it was a fine meeting. But I sat in that meeting and thought, if I knew nothing about the Portland Clean Energy Fund, if I knew nothing about the communities of color that collectively came together to both sell this initiative to the public and then to make sure that it reflected the values of the community-based organizations who put it together. If I didn't know the history, I would have walked out of that meeting believing that the Energy Trust of Oregon and PCEF were partners in the clean energy field in Oregon. And it was because the other participants, especially that were people of color that would be potentially applying for funds, were very young, very new to the energy field. And I really felt like they were being led in a direction that was inconsistent with the goals of the Portland Clean Energy Fund. And so what I wanted to share with you tonight is a sense of appreciation for you slowing down and making sure that small community-based organizations would have resources so that they could plan an effective application. And two, so that you will be providing technical assistance to those organizations, because I honestly I walked out of there really scared about the kind of proposals that you would be considering later this year. And I really felt like that there are a lot of people who have been doing clean energy for a lot of years, who are now meeting and becoming best friends with people of color, and will be trying to shape applications that honestly won't benefit the communities we want to benefit. And so I wanted to just come and say, thank you for your work. Thank you for your thoughtfulness. But also, I hope you will keep some severe pessimism, or I should say inquisitiveness, as you're out talking to folks who want to be partners. In my mind, I'll just say what I'm hoping that you will see. What I'm hoping you will see is proposals that are from frontline communities, BIPOC communities, and that they will be proposing to buy resources from some of the traditional folks who are accustomed to sucking up the money and actually not producing results for communities of color. And so what I hope, as you're providing technical assistance, as you're talking to very small community-based organizations, that you help them understand that they are in the lead. They may not have expertise in clean energy. They may not have expertise right now in whatever, whether it's a clean energy, solar, whether it's weatherization, they may not have that expertise. But what those frontline BIPOC communities have are people who have been left out of the economic prosperity that many, many, many people have enjoyed in Portland. And so I wanted to make sure that you knew that other people are trying. They say that they're trying to be helpful, getting the word out about the Portland Clean Energy Fund. And of course, we have to believe people have good intentions. But I'm old, I've been around a long time, and I know how folks will frame things so that the beneficiaries are not necessarily the people we want to be beneficiaries. There was a reason why when I started working on the Portland Clean Energy Fund, that we led with race. we were very intentional about both leading with race and making sure that the public knew that the beneficiaries would be people of color. I had to actually step in and say, you are the person that's going to be creating this new workforce, because as you guys know, the current workforce in clean energy is white and male. And had we waited for their equity programs or their minority set-aside programs, we'd be waiting another 20 to 25 years. And so I guess I came to caution. I said to Sam, I got to go talk and just say, you know, I love that you're slowing down. I love that you're providing more community support. But my message is a cautionary one of there are a lot of brand new partners who all of a sudden love BIPOC communities and want to be partners. But your job is really going to be essential and making sure that the proposals that you see truly benefit BIPOC communities, and they're not just being used by organizations who are accustomed to using BIPOC organizations for their own benefit. And so it's not like you don't have enough pressure on you already, right? And you don't have enough people trying to tell you to hurry up and get that money out the door. But I want to be the one that says to you, thank you for slowing down. Thank you for your intentionality. And please be aware that some of these proposals will look a lot better than they really are. And they will look that way because some people have a lot more expertise in putting proposals together that say one thing and actually their outcomes don't match it. So that's really all I had to say.
Thank you,
Happy to
Commissioner
answer
Hardesty.
any
Really
questions.
appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Happy to answer any questions you may have. Otherwise, I'm off to my next meeting.
Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you. And please, if you need any help at all from the city council, I'm your go-to person. You just reach out to my office and we'll do what we can to help remove barriers and to help you be successful in your work. Just know my entire office has your back and we're here to help you. Take care.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
All right. Sam, did you want to talk at all about sort of public participation before we get into public comments, or right after?
Right after.
Okay. So we do have 2 people signed up for public comment. And so when I'm just going to ask you to, Anissa Pemberton, to unmute yourself. And if you want to also maybe put yourself on video. Hello.
Hi. Hi, folks.
Next, oh, and just wanted to note that after Anissa is Randy Ramos. Go ahead, Anissa.
Yeah, thank you. As most of you know, my name is Anissa Pemberton, and I'm the Portland Clean Energy Fund Coalition Coordinator at the Coalition of Communities of Color. I hope you all are taking care, and I hope that, and I'm really grateful for all of your work. I wanted to thank Commissioner Hardesty for sharing the story of the Energy Trust of Oregon's impact on the clean energy sector. She is spot on with her comments and why the Portland Clean Energy Fund Coalition really planned to do this work. In this critical moment of civic engagement, an ongoing economic crisis and a health crisis, I continue to be very impressed by the dedication and care that you all are taking to this work. The PCEF Coalition has been very grateful for the opportunity to continue to engage with you all in discussions about the draft grant scoring criteria. Today I'm coming to talk about sort of the ongoing debates that are happening within the committee, and I really respect both sides of the conversation on the workforce and equity contracts. I understand that it's really complicated. We're dealing with a sector that was not meant to meet the needs of low-income people and BIPOC communities. It was meant to exclude us. I really empathize with like the tensions that folks are holding around this. I do want to mention that we, as the PCEF Coalition, want you all to consider the value of keeping the large grants application simpler for this year, with a goal of continuing to learn and grow and watchdog this conversation as the program unfolds. There is a real sense of urgency that is starting to add up for the PCEF Coalition. I know in our original comments to you all, we said, hey, if you need more time, take more time. And I still stand by that. But I think we all have to balance, you know, what is more time at this point going to mean in the long run? How much farther are we going to push out the launch of the program, and how much farther is it going to take for funds to go out the door? And so we're really happy with like the current kind of slowing down and integration of community feedback. But we also, you know, recognize that we're working on a tight timeline at this point. I would love to see some resolution soon out of the workforce equity section. I cannot pretend to be an expert on the topic. And so instead I sort of drafted some questions for folks of like what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about the section. So what information does the grant committee want? Why do you want it? And how can you get it? If you can't compare applicants without this level of detail that was in the original grant application, then that's obviously more complex. And I think the questions for me then come down to like, why not? What's slipping through the cracks? What could you evaluate, compare, et cetera, that you couldn't do so without that information? How does it feed into judging applicants for the purpose of PCEF? What is the additional value of this information? What is lost? And so overall, I just really encourage people to think creatively about how y'all are going to approach this. Maybe there's a requirement that is very specific that requires a smaller change in the revision that is still less burdensome, but can really meet the needs of the grant committee. So this is basically all I had to say tonight. Once again, I really appreciate all of your efforts. Thank you so much. I'm always here as a resource for you all if you all want to reach out or have any questions about my comments tonight. Thank you all again. I'm really looking forward to tonight's meeting.
Okay, Anis, if you can just hold on for a second there. Rand, please, you had a question, and then Maria.
Yeah, thanks, Nissa, for joining us at this meeting and your feedback. Are there any specifics from our debate from the last couple of meetings that I think raised the top from your coalition's concerns? And then just like a follow-up question in terms of at least an importance for me is, I guess, a question for your coalition, if there's any way, are there approaches that this committee can look at to applying a BIPOC lens within workforce and contract equity, and if you feel like we've sufficiently met that need?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for your first question, my understanding is that some of the debate that I've been listening to is more around the topics of like community benefits agreements, and then also tracking BIPOC representation in the workforce. And I think both of those conversations are really complicated. I think my understanding is that I guess my questions around the community benefits agreements are more around, you know, how many nonprofits does this affect? And so is it going to really impact the way that you all are judging it? And I can't necessarily say that it won't, but it's just a question in my mind of who is really impacted by community benefits agreements and what sort of information are you looking for in that context? And then in terms of the BIPOC workers and counting the BIPOC workers, it seems like getting down into too much detail may be hard for contractors. When we're talking about, I really respect the position of really centering Black and Indigenous people. I think it's really important. And so, but when we're getting into the details of the workforce, I'm not sure that contractors will know, you know, what that workforce will necessarily work like, which I know is complicated because I know Latinos, for example, are represented pretty highly in the construction industry. So I may not answer all the questions you all have. What was your second question?
I think that was, I think it was, if you felt like the way that our workforce and contracting questions are designed, if the coalition felt like it already reflected a BIPOC lens.
Yeah, I'd love to follow up with you about that a little bit more. Since I've only seen them in like presentation form, it's been a little bit hard for me to really analyze it fully. I take a little bit longer to process this particular conversation, but I'd love to follow up with you and look at the documents a little bit more in detail.
Thanks, Anissa.
Thank you.
Maria?
Hi, Anissa. Thanks for showing up to these meetings and continuously communicating with all of us and the staff about this application process. I have a question, and I'm not sure if this is like the best forum for it, but it came to mind since it's pretty recent that I've been asked by folks why is the Portland Clean Energy Fund Committee fundraising, and how is that related to the committee's work? This might not be the forum for it, but I would appreciate a quick response. I know the answer, but I think it would be helpful to communicate that to the public. I appreciate the committees, the community organizations who are part of the coalition and the work that you do, and would just like to give that platform to tell us, like, what are you all up to, and to give us that brief context.
Sure. So the Portland Clean Energy Fund Coalition came together to pass the ballot measure and then implement it in partnership with the city. And so what we are dealing with right now is a real, constant need for resources for BIPOC communities. A lot of our community organizations who are more white dominant are able to show up consistently because they are solely funded to do environmental or climate work. They do not have to worry about housing or criminal justice system or any other topic, really. They can very much focus on conservation and climate and environment. So what we're seeing in our coalition is a real need to resource our BIPOC communities so they can continue to participate in the coalition. Our coalition has always been led by BIPOC communities, and without resourcing them, we're going to see our leadership fall. And frankly, we won't be as helpful in representing the communities that we need to represent. And so that's the main reason. Folks probably have seen, different fundraising endeavors that I've led. And the other reality that I do want to speak into the space is that there is a certain role for community organizations and community-based organizations that the city simply cannot do. The city cannot defend the program against opposition attacks the way the coalition can. We can more easily say, hey, Portland Business Alliance, back off. And that's our role as a watchdog organization. And I fully want to keep you all out of that mess and out of that issue. So that is the main reason that you all are seeing some fundraising efforts. You're going to continue seeing fundraising efforts. The other reality is our coalition is likely to do other things in the somewhat near future. And so we will continue to be operating both as a watchdog group for the Portland Clean Energy Fund grant program. Luckily, you all are wonderful partners in that work, and also as leading other climate justice initiatives.
Thanks, Anissa. Randy Ramos, can I ask you to unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Randy with RJ Ramos Construction Electrical Company. My notes are a little scattered here, so you'll have to bear with me. I'm probably better at getting questions than, I guess, just giving my input here. But a few things I wanted to share is I love what PCEF is doing and what they stand for. Local 48 had asked me to attend one of the PCEF meetings, and they told me what PCEF stood for. And I was like, I feel like they built this program for me. I would love to help, all minorities, low income women. I want to get them into the trades. I want to do a lot of training. I spend a lot of time and money and effort with all of my employees for training. So this program seems amazing, and I love the idea of it. That being said, I feel like there might be a little bit of a bumpy road in the starting process. And that being said, and one of the reasons is I did a recent project at the city of Portland, the Portland building. There was requirements for women and minority utilization for the project. We were able to do the job 100% minority labor, but I had a really, really hard time getting female apprentices and female electricians to the point of where they wanted to find me $25,000. I was doing everything I could to try to recruit women into the project, but with electrical, it's not as simple as just hiring someone and interviewing someone kind of off of the street. They got to go through the apprenticeship process through the union, and it's kind of time consuming, and they're not readily available anyhow on the female side of it. I didn't have to bring in any more electrical labor as far as minority, so I don't know if I would have encountered any hurdles there. Something tells me possibly. So I like the idea of having requirements for like percentages of what you would like to see for minority and women and low income people on these projects, but at the same time, is it realistic and attainable? That my goal is to train people and bring people into the trade, and hopefully some of these nonprofits that have a lot of the youth that they're working with will be a door for me to be able to bring those people in. But at the same time, I mean, training takes time, and time is money. So I'm sure you all realize that and know that. It's going to be an interesting process starting out, and I'm glad I'm involved, and hopefully I can be involved more. I guess that was that note. The other thing was the LCP tracker. I feel like you guys should have a low threshold on the dollar contract for people to use LCP tracker. It is a little bit of a pain, and we kind of had a little bit of a hard start using it, but I feel like the whole point of the program is to help train contractors and get them up to a level to compete, hopefully in the real market, in the real world. I mean, you guys it's still real world and real work, what you guys are asking everyone to do, but I know you're going to get a lot of pushback probably from the smaller contractors to do things like LCP tracker or even spreadsheets. But you know, it's part of business, and hopefully they can maybe lean on their nonprofit partners to maybe assist them with it if they don't have the admin help. I'm just trying to throw out ideas. So I mean, I don't have all the answers, but hopefully something like that can happen. One of my other thoughts was I really think that there should be requirements for safety training, you know, signpostings, policies. You know, you want all of your contractors to be professional and act professional, and hopefully if they're not implementing those things, they can start doing it because it's a requirement because of PCEF. I mean, at the same time, we don't want to put in too many hurdles to have people not want to take on this kind of work, but it's just going to make them a better contractor. So I think that's all I have written down. That I know I have more, but I can't think about it off the top of my head. But if anybody has any questions, I could definitely try to answer them as best as I can.
Thanks, Randy. Ranfis does have a question. Go ahead, Ranfis.
Hey, thanks for your testimony. Just had a follow-up question, or a clarifying question. So my understanding, we don't have a percentage requirement for minority, as the industry calls it, or POC worker utilization goal. So I'm just kind of clarifying if you were suggesting we should have a requirement, or if there was a concern with how the application is.
I like the idea of a requirement because hopefully people can strive to achieve it, even if it's not possible in the market we have here. But at the same time, you know, when you're getting applications, somebody could say, I'm going to have 90% minority labor, you know, 40% women labor, and it's not realistic out there. So I guess it's kind of pivoting off of a different part there, but I don't know how you guys are going to vet these out, because someone might have good intentions, like I think Hardesty had mentioned, but it might not be realistic. So I do think percentages would be good to add something in there, but just to kind of, I guess, hold people's, I don't want to say hold their feet to the fire, but just so they're trying to do that, or have backup that they are trying to do that anyway.
Thanks for the clarification. And then in your suggestion there, in terms of, I agree wholeheartedly with Commissioner Hardesty's take on being pessimistic about the industry. Do you believe that tracking the history of performance of contractors on meeting goals and tracking that through the full life of PCEF for future grants would be important as we track contractor performance?
I feel like it should be more like, what progress are you making from this point going forward? You know, or what are you trying to attain to benefit the community in that regards? You know, because some people from past performance, you could say they have tried to possibly bring in minorities and people of color to take on some of this work, but they're not having a lot of luck possibly. So hopefully these nonprofits will shift that tide and be able to bring people to the table where they can pull from that pool of people to train and help with this work.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Randy.
You're welcome.
All right, before I turn it over to Sam to go over timeline and make a couple of comments, I just wanted to note that we are going to shut the chat down
so that it will just be, if you send a chat, it will just be going out to staff. So we kept that open through the public comment period, but now we're going to close that down. And I also wanted to just take this opportunity to ask the committee if they have reviewed the minutes from the July 15th meeting, and just to kind of raise your hand if you have any comments, edits, corrections. All right, looks good. So we will call those accepted, and Sam, I'll turn it over to you.
Before we get into timeline, I just wanted to, as we close out the public comment, I wanted to respond to a comment and an ask that committee member Maria Sippen made last week. And that was just, currently what we have here is the structure that we've had is we've opened up our public comment at the front of each of our meetings. And it can feel bureaucratic because it's a one way, it's the one opportunity in the meeting, and folks we haven't necessarily created other opportunities for folks to have feedback. I just want to acknowledge that it's a conversation I would like to come back to as a committee. It's a conversation I think we need to have as a full committee. It's a conversation I actually hope a couple additional staff are back, particularly June from maternity leave, in part because it's something that we've deliberated around a lot in terms of what feedback, who gets an audience to you all, what feedback you hear, because certain folks get to participate in our committee meetings and certain folks don't get to. And so just thinking around how do we actually structure that so that you all are actually getting a representative or even actually hearing more from BIPOC-led organizations and BIPOC communities in your feedback. So it's been a debate that we've had internally before, and I want to acknowledge that we appreciate that, and that's a conversation I hope that we can come back to shortly here and discuss as a committee and brainstorm what are other ways in which we can do that in balancing those various tensions of who gets to show up to our committee meetings and be in dialogue with you all. So I want to acknowledge that was an important comment that was made, and it impacts the feeling and flavor of our meetings, and it's a conversation we want to come back to and have with the full committee, ideally after the RFP gets released and things are a little slower. All right. Thank you. Okay, so what we're going to do here, and let me open up my notes so I'm making sure what we've got here, and this is, I think we've done staff has done a great job in putting up this timeline, but it's not the timeline you're used to seeing that June may have put together, and that's just we don't have our artistic talents with us. But what we wanted to do here today is kind of bring you all and give you an update on the timeline so we know where we're at, and so you have an expectation of sort of how things are rolling out. Because we have taken a few different pauses and delays in the process, and it was just important to really capture that and sort of update you all so that you see sort of where things are going and just make sure that folks are aware of when we're at least tentatively calling you in for additional support as we get to actually reviewing the grant applications. So sort of this red mark here marks where we're at today. What we're anticipating here is that we've got a few more weeks here as we finalize the scoring criteria, and we'll spend at the end of the meeting, we'll talk about exactly what we're planning on working through our next committee meeting and sort of what are milestones that we really need to hit to even stick to this timeline. But at a high level, we made a few adjustments. Originally, our aim was to release the RFP sometime in June, July. As we got closer to the public comment period, we reflected that our RFP release date would be August 3rd. We extended our public comment period by about a week, which pushed us out to August 10th RFP release. And then as we got what was really great feedback, taking that feedback and working through that feedback and responding to that feedback, as we've just adjusted, that took more time. And then there was just an acknowledgement that as summer was going through, we need to internally make sure that we have time within our team to rest and recuperate. And so what that's done as far as the timeline is the current timeline we're looking at is releasing the RFP on September 14th. So about a month and a week out of where we had originally at the start of the public comment period, what we had originally proposed. And so it would be open from September 14th through November 13th. There would be a period of about a few days of eligibility review, which is just a quick review that staff would conduct. And then following that week, we would essentially over Thanksgiving and the week after, we would be conducting technical review. After that technical review, we would bring the scoring panels together, and there'd be scoring panels that would be convening and reviewing the applications between December 7th and January 15th. And during that period, there's a week where applicants are given an opportunity to respond to the scores that they receive. And after that week, there's a deliberation that happens with the scoring panels after you receive that brief response from the applicant around their draft score. And then there's the preparation of the full committee documents, and then the deliberations within the full committee document, the full committee that are going to be taking place in mid-January. Those final recommendations, we'd be finalizing and process, pulling together the recommendations to send to City Council, and we'd expect to essentially send those to City Council between early February, February 1st, February 12th, and City Council members have asked for about 3 weeks to review them. And so it would really, City Council awards would likely happen in late February, early March. And then once the awards happen, there'd be the contracting period, which would take roughly anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks to, and we prioritize sort of who we contract with first, but it's still in terms of, there's a lot that we've worked through that, certainly as we've talked about elements that we're shifting into the grant agreements. And so we'll certainly have templates and all that good stuff, but still, nonetheless, it'll take time. And so I just wanted to call that out, this is really what the updated timeline is looking like. And it's still quite a busy timeline, but I wanted to make sure folks had a sense for where things are landing now, given our current pace. So with that, I just want to see if anyone has any questions about the timeline. And we didn't post. You all will see this, so you all can sit with us, and we can certainly follow up with a little bit more written out if this isn't necessarily the format you want to see. But I wanted to just check in on that.
I think Robin has a question.
Yeah, thanks for sharing this and the update. I have a couple of questions. One is, aside from the initial upfront shift from August to, I think, September 14th, has there been any other significant changes post-application open period? Or is that just kind of shifted, down? So that's one question. Go ahead.
No, keep going with the second question. I'll come back to it.
Well, okay. And then the other question is, in the grant agreement, there was a lot of conversations last week, and I suspect there'll be some conversations today about shifting some screening in the review process from the application process to incorporating things into the grant agreement process. And I'm just kind of curious, what our role as a committee is, if there will be one, in the grant agreement kind of creation. Yep. And so I'm just kind of curious what's going to happen there.
Thank you, Robin. So I think as far as the back end of the application, as far as did anything change beyond sort of the release date? I think nothing really changed. I think what we added in here was just, there's a recognition, I think, in the early timelines of proposed that we didn't necessarily account for the fact that City Council would need 3 weeks to review the documents. And so it was we sort of commingled this sending everything to City Council. That's when the awards, and that isn't going to be happening. That, once we send it to City Council, they're going to need their time to review. And given that this we'll have a substantially new City Council, or at least a good chunk of City Council will be new. There's just going to be work to be done there. So I think that was really the only major change. Obviously, with tripping a little bit later, there are a few things that shifted in terms of the holidays, just because of what we can, and there's certain elements of the review that we had previously projected would happen with staff, and that's one thing if they happen over the holidays, and it's a different expectation if that's going to be with scoring panels. So there's just a few things that we're like, okay, now that that's shifted and we've bumped into Christmas, and that's review that's happening with the committee and you all, and it is a question we're going to have to come back to, because there's certain expectations we are placing there, that it did just push the timeline out a little bit further. But otherwise, substantively, there weren't really any changes in that element of the timeline. And then, Robin, to your point about the grant agreements, hopefully we'll chat a little bit about some of the expectations around the grant agreements. As we finalize the RFP, we will have the grant requirements and the elements that will be required in the grant agreements as part of the RFP. So those are pieces that we hope to talk a little bit about today at a high level around what we expect to see within the grant agreements, and we can bring those back to you all and I need to check in with the team, but you will have an opportunity to see what those are because those will be included in the RFP. Those we're going to be clearly communicating what are the grant agreements folks will have to meet. There are other elements of the grant agreements that are going to be developed on a per application basis that as part of an entity receiving a grant agreement that we realize they're short in this area and we're going to want them to do this. So some of those elements are going to be, they're going to be developed with the grantee based on just a needs assessment that we're going to do with them. And so as far as that piece goes, it isn't an element that we envisioned would be brought to the committee, but at least you'd see the template of the grant requirements and grant agreements that would be put into the RFP that everyone will be subject to in advance.
Okay, thanks. And I do have one follow-up question. You also mentioned that there will be this period where applicants can see their score and comment on it. Can you shed a little bit more light? I wasn't that aware that was going to happen, and plus a 1 week turnaround seems just pretty quick. So particularly, I think this is going to happen during the holidays. So if you can comment on that.
I know, Katie, you're involved in that, so you want to speak to what that, if I might have said it wrong.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I'd be happy to speak to that. So I think the idea is that the scoring panel gets assembled and then individually each of the panel members do their individual scoring. And then just the average of each of the section scores is shared with the applicant. And then they will have really an opportunity to fill out like a pretty brief response, like to provide a brief response. It's also an opportunity when will also be sort of the time when if we have any clarifying questions, we would bring those to the applicant at the same time so they could provide clarifying information and just a kind of brief response in the same format, everyone in the same format, to kind of how they were evaluated based on the average of the scoring panel's scores. And then that, so we were initially thinking that would happen over a week because it would be not very much like what we are asking folks to do would be to fill out like a relatively small amount of a relatively small form in response, and the clarifying information should be really simple because it should be really and truly just clarifying. But you're right that with the shifted timeline, it does bump into the holiday season, and so I think that that's part of the reason that period for the kind of scoring panel review got extended from 4 weeks to now I think it covers 6 weeks or almost 6.5 weeks because, you know, the Christmas week and the New Year's week are kind of right in the middle of that.
So all that happens in that December 7th through January 15th scoring panel blocker time.
That's the idea.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're not going anywhere, are you?
I don't think so, especially in this day and age.
That's right. This is presuming everyone is still sort of locked down and unable to travel too much, so.
And there's a piece of the conversation, and we sent it in the document that was sent to you, but in that response, that's one, there's one piece that we anticipate capturing there is, well, we don't need to go there, we can come back to that, but that response really was clarifying, and there's opportunities maybe to answer a couple more questions there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right.
Ranfis?
Yeah, stop me if this is a question we'll revisit later, but just wondering where in the timeline will the reporting documents, things that are expected from applicants, is that something that we'll see a final product down the road before the RFP goes out? Where does that fit in the timeline?
So all of the reporting requirements will be detailed in the RFP. Sorry, Sam.
Oh.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I think there's a chance that we may touch on some of those today because obviously there's a good chunk that relates to the workforce and contractor equity section.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. it'll still be a busy schedule, but fall will let up once the 60 days opens up. So. Okay. All right, let's move on there.
Okay. So I was just gonna go over, and this is a little bit in response to the conversation that we haven't had last week, and wanting to take at least maybe one way of stepping back and looking at the application. So this is what we wanted to start with, just kind of like at a high level, and you all also provided a memo that has a little bit more detail related to this, and that's also on the website for the folks who are members of the public participating. But just wanted to kind of go through a few slides here and make sure that you all had a sense of what the kind of scale of the effort would be for submitting a large application, and also a sense of kind of the distribution of the points for the different sections. So this is, again, just for large grants. So these are grants that are $200,000 to $1 million in this first year. And this estimated level of effort is just based on kind of the guidance that we were providing for each of the narrative questions, or each of the questions that requires a narrative response. And again, those are not firm guides. You know, people can do less and they can do more, but we wanted to, recognizing that we needed to provide some sort of an indication of, you know, what we thought folks might be, how much effort folks might be putting into it. So for the entire grant, there is also some variability depending on the type of project. And a lot of that has to do with whether or not it is a construction project that has a single site over $500,000, which kind of triggers this different set of workforce and contractor questions that increases the size of the application. So, and then the range also, though, is just reflective of the fact that we offer enough ranges. So in total, it would be 8 to 15 pages of narrative response, up to 9 tables. Wanted to also, though, note that 2 of the templates, the budget template and the milestones and tasks template, do have a place where you're asked to, you know, just describe a little bit of the task that you've listed or the budget line item that you've listed. Those shouldn't be really, really heavy narrative. That shouldn't be a lot of really heavy narrative, but there is a little bit in there too. And then in terms of documentation, financial documents are required, and everything else is optional. And these, I won't go through all of these sections, but I did just want to provide it for, you know, kind of like on a slide for folks who are, you know, accessing stuff online. This is each of the section contributions to that total. So you can see kind of where the most narrative comes in the project description and scope section. And then you can kind of see how it's broken up into the other sections. The budget section, for example, has a suggested range of 50 to 100 words, which is about a paragraph. It's like a short or a longish paragraph, plus filling out a few tables. And then the scoring, and this is where it can begin to feel a little bit confusing. And so I just wanted to make sure that the committee kind of understood how this was going to go, because we are writing this RFP, and this scoring criteria that is going to have a whole bunch of different, you know, we're going to be asked to use it to evaluate a whole bunch of different kinds of projects, which is a bit of a challenge. There really are different possible points for different projects, and they fall generally into these kind of 3 categories. The first is projects that include construction with a single site construction budget of $500,000 or greater, and they will be asked to answer all of the questions, and so they could potentially get all 100 points. The second type of project is, again, a construction project, but that does not have a single site with a construction budget of $500,000 or greater, and they will be able to earn up to 88 points.
And then the third category are projects that don't have any construction or infrastructure improvements, and those will earn up to 63 points. And then everything gets normalized so that it is on the same 100-point scale. So it's not as if non-construction projects will always score poorly. If they get all 63 of those points, they will essentially, it'll be normalized up to 100 for the purposes of kind of ranking when the committee is looking at them, when the full committee goes to look at them.
And Katie, you have a table describing that on the next slide, don't you?
I do. And then I have a pie chart describing it. So just in case if you want 3 different ways to describe it. So this one shows a little bit more detail, and this is kind of the impact of each section on those 3 different kinds of projects. And so you can see that like the organizational background and commitments, what we were previously calling organizational capacity and commitments, every type of project will be scored on all of the criteria in that section. Where it really begins to change, where it changes most dramatically is in the workforce and contractor benefits section. And then for environmental benefits, it changes also very dramatically for projects that don't have construction. And then here is a third way of looking at that. And this is just an example. This is an example of a project that could get up to 100 points. So would be one of those projects that had a single site with a construction budget of $500,000 or greater. And hopefully this is showing up the colors that I intended in your view. It was different in Sam's computer than I was seeing. But the 2 kind of yellow pieces of the pie chart that represent 48% or 48 points are really the criteria that give preference to culturally specific organizations that reflect the communities they intend to serve, and for serving PCEF priority populations. And then the remaining 52 points come primarily from the environmental benefits section, project description and scope, and then the budget section. Does that make sense?
So I want to place a fine point on this. This was in response to there are many scoring criteria that we had across the document, and we wanted to pull each one of those out that related to serving PCEF priority populations and add that up. So you could see cumulatively if someone was serving a PCEF priority population and if they reflect the community that they're serving, that they're able to get 48 points there. So I just wanted to, as part of pulling that out, since it wasn't always clear, since we had that called out in so many different sections.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. And that is the last slide in this section. So if folks don't have any, well, one, I just wanted to know if people have any questions or if there was a desire to kind of see the information in a different way. Some of this was, in response to comments that we heard from you last time. Robin?
Yeah, thanks for putting this together. It's hard to, this is a changing kind of very dynamic thing, and it's hard for us, at least for me, not being involved with the day-to-day changes to kind of see how this thing is morphing. So this has been helpful. I guess my only comment is back to kind of the first slide where you had talked about the size of the applications, the 8 to 15 pages of narrative responses. And I guess my only comment is to, reiterate to do what can be done to simplify the application process. I know Megan brought up some comments last week about, is there a way of looking at this to kind of really simplify things? So, 8 to 15 pages is a lot. I just looked at 2 grant applications that I submitted over the last 2 years, each of them over 250,000. And they were about 10 pages. These were 2 private, foundations. So you know, it's 8 to 15 is on the higher end. So again, you know, whatever can be done to, or, you know, to kind of just make it smaller, or make sure that we don't kind of incrementally kind of creep upwards. You know, next week will be, you know, 9 to 16 pages, and then, you know, 10, 20 pages. You know, I just want to be sensitive that, you know, 8 to 15 pages is a good amount of writing.
Thank you. I just want to, I think to that point, Robin, I think that there's places there where we can probably take another view to, you know, as part of this was on the basis of our estimated word counts as well. And there are probably areas there that we probably can look at and give either give a slightly different suggestion. So we can come and take another lens and view through that. And that's something we have done, and something that is, as we follow up at the end of this meeting, I mean, you'll see what we'll do is we'll send you all the entirety of the large draft grant scoring criteria that's been updated and ask you all for your feedback. So that's an area that we certainly welcome. That is just looking at those word counts, and does that still make sense? And even just having a Word document beside you to say, that's what 150 words feels like. That's what 75 words feels like, because that will change that as well.
Yeah. Megan?
Yeah, hi, thanks. Since I'm a person who made a comment last week on like trying to simplify scoring in addition to language, I just wanted to note that I appreciate sort of how you all broke down how you collapsed, I guess, the scoring and showed that to us in 3 different ways, Katie. And then you asked if we wanted to see it in another way. I don't need to see it in another way. I thought I'm very clear. And that was really helpful, because that's really hard to see when we're kind of looking at the small parts one at a time. So kind of being able to back out for a minute and say, okay. And I was pleased to see that that half, because it was 48 plus the 2 that were like hidden in the asterisk. But basically half of all of our points are about going to organizations that have historical track records of serving the exact communities we want to serve. So that to me feels really good. And then the other half are like environment, budget, kind of like all the other nitty gritty that also kind of, yeah. So that felt to me like a good like number, although I'm curious if other committee members feel differently than me about that. And yeah, you know, I'd go back to echo Robin's point. I'm actually on another grant review group, and I'm reviewing it right now for really big money. And I would say the 8 to 15 thing I'm seeing here is a little long, even compared to what I'm reviewing for federal government stuff. So, but hard to cut stuff, but yeah, just commenting. I guess I would just echo Robin's comments as much as we can to get substance more than length. But on the 8 feels really reasonable to me. The 15 starts to sound really long.
Yeah. One of the things that I will say we have kind of struggled with is one piece of feedback that we have gotten several times is that sometimes people from culturally specific organizations is that they don't like being told to keep things like too short, and that they want to be able, so some of our ranges are like, some of our range estimates for that reason are really big. So but yes, that doesn't, not to diminish your point, but I just wanted to kind of note that. And
no, that helps. I do think a range is nice, because different folks have different ways of communicating, and that's okay. And that's good. Like, so I like offering a range. That I do like that. So I understand all the trade-offs, and I appreciate staff's attention. I think this is probably down significantly from our original efforts. So thank you.
Andrea?
Thank you for backing us out and showing us of how a different application path leads you to different scoring. I do want to say, from my perspective, having both written an awful lot of applications and reviewed an awful lot of applications, I feel like the places where organizations put very strict limits on the amount that you can write, those applications take friggin' forever to write, and are just mind-numbing, trying to be crisp and clear and write haikus that like represent the work you want to do. And I would like to not force people to agonize over their word choice. We're not asking for poetry here. And so I just want to acknowledge that that's a different kind of labor. And it's a kind of labor that I think is for organizations with a dedicated grant writer or with a team of folks that are super familiar with grant applications, probably second nature, but for organizations where there's not that dedicated resource or less experienced grant writing, I think making space here will probably be really important. I know I had another point and it's gone, so I'll stop there.
Thanks, Andrea. Shanice?
Yes, reflecting on the updates from the last breakdown of criteria and points, that's definitely I think a lot more reflective of some of what we were wrestling with. And so I appreciate kind of this weight or space around the track record of BIPOC folks. So I don't want to reiterate too much things, but I appreciate that that this is something that's resonating with you all. So I just want to name it as well. I feel like my interaction with large grants, you know, that especially folks who might be seeking PCEF, the range at 15, I think does sound a little high. So maybe it's just a minimum that we're saying that is applied potentially in this context. And yeah, I think that the page range, if you will, it's definitely a little high. So it's a point of reflection too on potentially what kinds of projects might require a large narrative, and maybe it's more of a minimum than saying folks can't have the space if the minimum isn't necessarily enough. But those are just a couple of thoughts that.
Thanks, Shanice.
I think that's an area, I appreciate that comment, Shanice. When we send back out, I hope that that's an exercise that when we do send out this document, the revised draft on Friday, that you all look at the minimums and sort of just have a thing to decide, you know, have a Word document with the words and kind of feel out like this is 75 words, this is 50 words, can it be less? Because I hear we could draw that minimum down lower, not necessarily messing with the maximum, but we could draw the minimum down lower potentially.
Maria?
Yeah, I like the range. I think being able to encourage people to apply, even if, or to feel like they can be successful, even if their page minimum is on the lower end. I think that's an important thing we should communicate. I want to know, though, maybe you've answered this in other documents, but how public are people's applications going to be? I know some grant makers ask people to provide a certain level of simplicity or explanation because they will use it for public announcements, and they will take away chunks of it to advertise like who their grantees are. So how much do we share about people's applications, and, you know, so that people can wrap their minds around that?
I don't know if anyone on staff has the code pulled up in front of them right now, but I do know but I believe that we will be posting applications online. We certainly will, you know, remove telephone numbers and email addresses and things like that. And I can imagine that that we would also use if an applicant provides a project description, if that's how they're describing their project, because it's a fairly there's one question that just is like a pretty short project description, that we might use that when we're talking about it as well to city council or to documents to the committee. Sam, did you have any other thoughts on that?
Generally, I mean, yeah, we'll figure out what there are going to be elements of an application we expect to be redacted, but for the most part, there will be public applications. And I should have acknowledged that it's backing up to the comment about minimums, maximums. These aren't really minimums and maximums. They're suggestions. And so, but even though we know suggestions send a signal. And so it's still in the effort to, as you look at that, think about, you know, what, as a suggestion, what that lower bounds is. And if I find the statement within the initiative around the applications being posted, I will respond as well. This is all applications. Here we go. All applications and final recommendations will be posted on the committee's website. So that's the gist of it. So we'll have a clear policy around what are things to be redacted and an approach for folks to ask for redactions where there's sensitive material.
And Robin, your hand was up, but then it went down. You don't have a question? Okay. All right. Well, I think then we are ahead of schedule by about 23 minutes. And that we should probably begin. Sam, do you have a preference about beginning the conversation, about jumping back into the, yeah, okay. Well, then I'm going to stop so that you can share your screen.
All right, let me move my screens around. Okay. All right. Before I jump into this section, let me find this other document. Are folks seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
And we still will plan to take a 10-minute break at 7:30.
Thank you for that, Kate. Okay. So as we jump into this next section, what I just wanted to acknowledge is, I mean, first of all, that there's been, I know that we've said this a lot. I know that, you know, others have commented on this, but we've done a lot of really great work. And I will share that certainly I think when I started in this role, and I think I thought about this section, this was probably the most daunting section, the most daunting element of the program in my mind. It's workforce and contractor equity it's hard. As Michael, others have commented in the past, it takes time. It's developing career paths and pipelines and shifting the makeup of the workforce is going to take time. So I just want to acknowledge that what we have here today certainly surpasses what I expected in terms of the conversations that we've had in order to get to where we are here today. And some of those conversations have been, you know, design sessions hosted with partners pre-COVID, design sessions during COVID, range of conversations with both city partners, other jurisdictions around all their various programs to promote workforce and contractor equity, a whole range of one-on-ones, as well as a decision and discussion amongst you all to plan for a high road committee. So I want to state that there's been a lot that has gotten us to here, and a lot that we're going to learn. And so as we've thought through how to center, you know, diverse contractors, diverse workers, worker well-being, inclusive workplace culture, hiring advancement, there's a lot that's coming in here, and at the same end, we won't get this right this year. So I just wanted to start with that before we jump into this, and want to acknowledge that we're going to be coming back, hopefully, assuming that we were able to have time, I hope that we can actually come back to requirements that we're going to discuss as well and talk through in response to some of the things that we'll remove, how we balance them. Okay, let me see. Is my screen still sharing? I've moved things around a couple times. Okay, I think because I'm moving I'm like, did it come back?
Yeah, it came back.
Okay, good.
Yep. Looks like Robin had the question.
Yeah, quick question. Is this the same document that we continued off last week?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It is. And I know that when we sent it to you all, we sent it to you all in two parts because we were partially working on it. So it may not have the same watermark, but the content is the same.
Okay.
So you all have seen this. Mm-hmm. Okay. So just starting with the workforce and contractor equity benefits section, want to start off with we'll go through the same process. We'll start off with the application changes, go through the actual questions in the applications themselves, and then go through the changes in the scoring criteria. Then ideally, if we have time and I want to shift to some of the elements that we're thinking about in terms of the grant agreements and grant requirements. Sound good? Okay. So first change that we made in response to feedback is we just removed the request for estimated job hours. There is just the feedback around this was folks felt that this was a little complicated and it was a hard ask, I think this certainly folks felt like this for those disaggregated projects across multiple sites, and thought that there was also just a back and forth around the fact that this may send the wrong signals in terms of the types of jobs that we want and the value around those jobs. So we ultimately removed the request for estimated job hours. In terms of the questions themselves, we removed the request for specific information about contracts not related to construction activities from all project types. So originally we did ask about contracts related to your consulting contracts you may have in your projects, maybe your supplier contracts, other contracts that weren't related directly to construction. And as we sought to simplify and focus the application itself, it was the reality around this particular section is the focus is, I think we drew the focus to construction. And so the focus really is on all the hard and soft costs around construction, but less those other contracts you may procure around a particular project. So we pulled some of those details out. We increased the threshold that triggers the move from section 1, which was sort of a less detailed set of questions, to the more detailed set of questions. So we increased the threshold from 350,000 to 500,000. So if you remember, at 350,000 originally, that's when we asked you, who is your contractor? You'd have to come into an application with a contractor named, and what that allowed us to do is to ask subsequent questions about the contractor's history of performance and a range of things around the contractor's utilization, other things. But it allowed us to get more detailed because the presumption is once you, at a certain threshold, we want to know about your contractor, you have to have a commitment from a contractor, and that allows us to ask these subsequent other questions. So we raised the threshold from 350 to 500,000. And I think in raising that, the reality is we don't have a good sense. The feedback we heard is folks felt 350 was too low. I think when we started in some of our conversations with the cohort of nonprofits we brought together, we started with 750. Folks were like, okay, that feels right. And we're like, what if we move it to 300, to 500? And folks were like, we're not sure. But so it's a big question mark whether folks feel like you at 500,000 feels like is that the right level to get a contractor committed to your project so you can answer the subsequent questions. So but we moved that's where we're starting with right now, or that's what we have here. And we can share additional feedback that we've had as well. We removed questions about workforce utilization and inclusiveness for projects without a single site of 500,000 or greater. And as well, we removed questions about tracking utilization. And so what we're doing there is, so for those section 1 questions, this was for those projects across multiple sites or smaller than that threshold, which is now 500,000. We removed questions about workforce utilization. And I think that this is going to be one of, certainly of all these, there's going to have to be a focus on seeing what this means in future years. But this was one where originally, if you recall, and this connects to the scoring criteria, you'll see that to get the highest score, you had to come in with a contractor identified. You could get the highest score for projects under 500,000. Let's stick with that framework now. Under 500,000, you could still get the highest scores if you had your contractor identified. And a lot of the feedback that we heard is it's for those disaggregated projects across multiple sites, it's hard to come into a proposal 6-7 months out when you're having multiple contractors you may contract with and name your contractors. And they felt that benefited larger projects. And there was still a concern whether even those single site $200,000 contract, whether you could come in and name a contractor in a project. So, and those other questions on workforce utilization, inclusiveness, there is a back and forth around whether you really, if you're changing the scoring criteria, could you really answer questions about your workforce without having a contractor on board? Was it just an exercise then that you just threw numbers out there, and how much validity did it have? So I'm saying all this. I know that it's a lot that I'm saying. So I want to acknowledge that as we go through the questions, we'll come back to some of these. So don't please ask the question if you need clarification, if you just want to sit on that or repeat it, because this is a complicated section, and it's complicated for certainly us. It's complicated for folks that you know, a lot of our nonprofit partners acknowledge this was one of the most complicated sections, and they had to diagram this whole thing out in order to try to navigate and answer this section. So acknowledge that, and I want to make sure that we're doing that. And then the last set of changes is we removed detailed questions about subcontractor utilization and inclusiveness for projects without a single site of 500,000 or greater. So again, this point here is that similarly, what you'll see is we're no longer, as we get to the questions, we're no longer asking you to name your contractor if you have it for those projects across multiple sites or less than 500,000. And so as part of that, we felt that you really couldn't, in a meaningful way, ask about subcontractor utilization. And so a lot of the focus there will shift to strategy. So that's at a high level the changes. We'll walk through the sections themselves and what they look like now. But before we do that, I want to, Faith, I know you have a question.
I have a comment and a question. And the comment isn't super well formed, but I'll try to be quite succinct. I know I missed last time, and it sounded like it was a robust meeting last time with lots of debate and good conversation. So I'm sorry I missed it. But I did just want to something that I've been reflecting on is the difficulty of being on the committee at this point in the game and not knowing exactly what the role is for responding to changes to the grant. And so what I've been thinking about as my role is really just to make sure that you as staff are on task of listening to public comment and then responding reasonably. Not to, at least for myself, it's not to make sure that it fits with my idea exactly of what that scoring criteria should be. So I just wanted to reflect that for me, at least, my role on the committee at this level, at what I think it is really just to be sure that you're all responding reasonably to the public comments that we're hearing in service of the guiding principles and what the initiative stood for. And I just wanted to say, I think you're doing fabulous. I know we're getting tons of feedback that's really useful, and it's hard to know how to balance the different efforts. And I think that you're doing a really thoughtful job, so I appreciate that. So I just wanted to share that, and I wanted to share that earlier, but I didn't want to belabor what was going on. Thanks, Katie, for sharing the many different ways of looking at the scoring criteria. The question I have here specifically is around this tracking of utilization in the grant agreement. So do we have thresholds or requirements, or are we just saying, tell us what you're doing?
No, we do have thresholds and requirements, and we're still fine-tuning those. And I think we can get to those. I think there's a chance we can get to those today, just to talk about what would be the thresholds and which. And comments are Randy Ramos, when he commented, he mentioned LCP Tracker, which is Labor Compliance Platform. Correct me if I'm wrong, Janet. And that is a platform. For instance, I know Jeffrey and others have familiarity with that on the construction side, but that's a platform, for instance, that is used to track your workforce and your data around your workforce, their wages, their hours, and their demographics. And it's tied to so that's one thing, and we'll talk about what thresholds in which we see an entity using that versus what threshold in which we would see an entity or give an entity an option to use spreadsheets, because there's an effort to learn these new platforms, and so we'll talk through that, and I think there's varying thoughts around that. But,
so Sam, I wasn't thinking about the tracking so much as what is the...
So Faith, just to clarify, it's not, is there a threshold that you report? It's a threshold of that you report on this specific platform or have a different way of providing the information. But you're still going to be reporting on your utilization and disaggregated data on that utilization.
And my question was around, thank you for that. Thank you both for that. My question was really intended to say, do we have targets?
For utilization.
Mm-hmm. So this is, I appreciate this, thank you. And this is an area of tension. I think when we started down this road, I think what we started with is for this particular, for the kind of projects that we're going down, there's a long debate, there's a robust debate around this. The city region, you see targets around minority or POC contractor utilization, women contracting firm utilization, utilization of POC workers, women workers, and there's various thresholds that exist out there. And there's varying degrees of success in meeting those thresholds. And as we went down this road with PCEF and the sort of the more, some of these projects aren't necessarily in alignment with those other programs because you may be working in a single family residential sector, which hasn't had the same public investment in tracking that this sector has. So our approach originally, and this is the tension point, our approach when we started out was that it would be a race to the top approach. We would not come out with firm minimum requirements around any of these, that we would capture the data and over time work on developing that plan with data research, other things that we would then in an iterative process set those clear goals, and then based on those goals, as we get some initial information coming in, set requirements. And so the expectation was in these early years that we would really be focused on a race to the top, that the application itself would allow for a differentiation in terms of meeting these various goals so that folks could compete on these criteria. And I think that's where we started. And I think the rub, as we sort of gone full, I don't know if it's full circle yet, it's just been implementing that, asking those questions at that level of resolution and what it means and how you do all that. And so that's what we've been reckoning with, I think, is collectively sort of what our intentions were from the start around taking a race to the top approach without requirements, knowing that that has had it's been a mixed bag in and of itself, and yet where we are now.
So no targets yet? Yeah.
No targets yet. Yeah, sorry, that's a quick answer to that.
So that's fine. And I guess I would also take any reflections now or, anytime, and could be offline, about whether or not I'm at all off base with or at all on base with what my responsibility is at this point on the committee for evaluating and providing feedback. So you don't have to answer that now, but I would absolutely take reflections on that.
I appreciate your reflection, Faith. I think it's worthwhile to consider. I think this is a new body. You all are forming and figuring out your roles. So I think that's an evolving piece. And I think that you all are here. I mean, you all are the body that's here to make sure we are accountable. But at the same end, there's it's figuring out how we do that. We're gonna collectively move on that and evolve on that. Okay. Janet.
Yeah, I just wanted to weigh in a little bit also on that piece that we've been wrestling with, the targets or the no targets, or people defining their own target. And that is the piece where we look for, when you do have a contractor, what their record of performance of having recruited and retained and used folks. And when we talk about the strategies, I think it's important to remember, I know it goes kind of back and forth with, we're not talking about agreements yet, but it's important to hold that notion that the current draft of process is that one of the very first things you do when you get that grant agreement is that you're working with your grant manager, program manager, to be clarifying what that outreach strategy is and what those commitments are. And then you're reporting, and that's being tracked. And one of the things that we heard from like the CBA reviews and other studies was people can put a number out there, but it's these strategies and things that they do that are going to take you toward or away from those goals. And sometimes even when you follow the strategies, as Randy pointed out earlier, the numbers right now, just the supply's not quite there. And so it was this piece of people can put out numbers and say, here's my target, but they might be just magical thinking. And really we want to focus on what are those strategies, and then locking down those commitments and doing the tracking through time. And then as Sam mentioned, putting together a high roads committee, being able to track the data, and over time, as the legislation says, we will define measurable and ambitious targets and talk about performance on those goals. But it was just felt premature at this moment to put out numbers when they're based on not really anything.
Okay.
Sorry, one more thing. Have you looked at the Community Clean Energy Jobs Act in Illinois? It's the one that always gets compared with PCEF when you're talking nationally. And I don't know what the workforce requirements are of that, but I'd be happy to reach out and see what they're doing if that's interesting to y'all.
Yeah, happy. I mean, we've got 29 pages of the different documents and things that we've looked at. That one actually is not on there. Other ones are. But the thing that we came up with was just responding to what the community was saying they've experienced and what's seeming workable at this moment in time. But yeah, if they're doing something different in the way that they're wrestling with that question, that'll be great. I'll look that up. Thanks.
And as I move into the questions, I mean, I think that just to add a point to it is that the reality is, and I think this comment has been raised before on staff, we're good researchers, we can do good engagement, but this isn't an area, this isn't our area of expertise. And so, and we've had certain conversations where this is folks' areas of expertise, but there's a reality that we do need it. That High Roads Committee is going to be incredibly impactful in terms of bringing a body and a group of stakeholders together that are experts in this area that dig into these, as we are also seeing sort of the types of projects that we're getting so we can ground the conversation in what we're actually seeing. I mean, I think that has been the hard place in this. And until recently, where we placed a $1 million cap, we really did not have a realm for the kind of projects we were going to see. And so only recently did we start to bound that, and that starts to bound the conversation. Yet we know that conversation will shift next year when that cap looks different again. So I just want to, creating that space is going to be incredibly impactful. And at the same end, I think my comment in expressing that we've gone so far and farther than my expectations was that I acknowledge that I always thought from the get-go that this was going to be a multi-year conversation around having that sort of table. And yet here we are with what I think is a solid first start.
So Ranpeace has a question or comment, and then maybe before we jump into the questions, we can take our break and then come back and jump into them. Ranpeace?
Yeah, thank you. I think I also am kind of questioning what is my particular role in this committee in terms of how do I leverage my expertise, how, when is it my role to just listen to the feedback? But I think I do want to point out that up until this point, as we've talked about the contractor and workforce benefits, we're really getting feedback from nonprofit organizations and contractors. And I haven't really heard the conversation here centering on the voices of workers and what they've seen as barriers to get into these trades and into this industry. Like I think Anissa noted earlier, we do see high representation of Latinos in the construction industry, but we don't see them represented in the licensed trades. And I think those are, key questions that I think this industry needs to begin answering some of those questions. And I think it doesn't explain some of the disparities we see beyond and all the different classified trades for both women and BIPOC community members. And it is a question I continue to ask for us in our committee that has a stated value on BIPOC on this is like, how is it reflected? How is BIPOC as a value being reflected in the workforce and contractor benefits? Because I do want to point out, and I pointed this out to staff, that it's the way that our goal settings and our strategies are set up for a POC framework, but not a BIPOC framework. And I understand that this may be a challenge for nonprofits that are applying for the first time. And this will be a challenge for contractors, both new and emerging contractors, but even contractors that have been here for a long time that have benefited from programs like Energy Trust. I think back to Commissioner Hardesty's comment, I think Energy Trust has been around here for a long time, and we still see disparities around women and people of color. And I think we have made some progress in these questions, but I think it's still, this section still feels very complicated for our community members, but still feels very nebulous. That I don't even know if it really achieves the kinds of outcomes and the kinds of challenges that we need to ask the entire industry to make inroads around workforce and contract equity. So I'm still reflecting on that, but I do just want to point out that I think there is a need here for uplifting the voices of workers throughout this process, and that's an emphasis and challenge for staff that I want to, as we move forward, is how do you get those voices, and how do we do that legwork? together.
Michael?
I'd just like to reiterate what Ramfi said, which is that I think we have heard a lot of the voices of our community partners and of contractors, not of workers. One of our focuses is to build wealth in frontline communities and our priority communities, and that is contractors, yes, but that's mostly workers. And so I would like, as we continue on into next year, to really put a focus on workers and some worker voices as we continue to develop this program next year. I think that's really important. I think I think that, $1 million work site might have 5 or 6 contractors on it and, 30 or 40 workers, 50 workers, 60 workers versus 6 contractors. So I think it's an important voice that we are missing. And yeah, that's all.
I appreciate that, Marcus and Michael. I mean, I think that those most impacted are often those hardest to reach, and so it's at that point. I mean, we've certainly engaged with unions around the table, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we've connected with workers. And I mean, and it does and it doesn't, right? And I think that it's at that point that we welcome that feedback around as we sort of move forward, how we structure that, because this year there's a lot we've been pulling together this year, and it means that there's some things that I mean, there are areas, there are blind spots, and there are areas where some things are as I acknowledge this isn't necessarily my area of expertise, so I appreciate all the feedback you all have brought, and I hope that as we move into, as we look to next year, how we can reshape that process and how we set that table for that High Roads Committee.
Yeah, and I'd like to reiterate that we're here to do the hard work, right? We're doing this in a new way, and it's not an easy way. We're here to do the hard work. We're here to do the outreach. We're here to gain the knowledge. We're here to listen to the communities and the people that we're going to affect. And that's the hard work that we got to do.
All right. Well, let's take a break before we jump into more hard work, which is going to be the workforce and contractor benefits section. It's 7:34 right now, so if we can all be back at 7:44, that would be great. Right. Like everybody's back.
Okay. All right. Let's go through the questions here. So picking back up on the workforce and contractor benefits section in the questions, we're going to go ahead and move to the questions before we move to the scoring criteria. So the first question is just simple. It's, will this project include a physical or capital improvement or installation? So are you building something? If no, then this section isn't relevant to you. Before it was, because we asked about your contracting, your consulting, other things. Now we're just focused on really contracting as it relates to building things. And so you would just move to the budget section. If you answer yes, that you are building something, the second question is just, is it a project at a single site that's over, is there a project at a single site that's over 500,000 or not? If there isn't, you first ask this first set of questions. So when I say there isn't, you're either doing a project that's less than $500,000 at a particular site, or you are you're retrofitting homes across many areas, and that in total adds up, but it doesn't. But no singular site is over 500,000, and that just changes those questions, and we separate and create that distinction because it's whether you really have a general contractor or not at a certain value. So let's go to the first section. So the first section is, again, those projects below $500,000 at a singular site. So what we're now asking, and the focus is on, describe your strategy to recruit diverse, locally based contractors for services related to construction on this project. If the project will include subcontractors, describe how the recruitment strategy will address recruitment and utilization of diverse subcontractors. So the focus here is now entirely on the strategy for the most part. Prior to this, it had asked, it was a similar question. It asked about your strategy, but it also said, if you know your contractor, list your contractor. And so, and we can get into what that did, but generally now the focus for these projects is all on your strategy. And so our focus as on managing these projects, you know, we score the strategy, but then when we manage the projects, it's going to be really, and this is where we're going to work with partners in the next bit to really detail out how we're assuring implementation of strategies. Are you just picking up and calling 3 contractors and there you go, you've met your strategy, but how are we actually fully feeling out and teasing out whether folks are implementing their strategy? So that's going to be the work on the back end in managing these grants, but it is that the weight goes on the strategies. The next, and I'm going to pause as I go through sort of this section of questions, and I'll pause and come back. Next set of questions for this is.
Sam Ramsey has a question. Sorry.
Yeah, just something for y'all to consider year 2. I don't know how many regenerative agriculture applications we'll receive, but in agriculture, it's pretty common that farm workers are hired through contractors. So I don't know. The goal was to capture how folks are being compensated in some of these projects, but it would be something, again, I would advocate, engaging with folks who are hired to work in agricultural projects. I just wanted to note that. I think it's probably a longer conversation, but I think it's just a flag as we're reviewing this that it's something we'll be definitely missing this round.
Thank you, Ramsey. So what we will have as part of this, and for all of these projects, I mean, I think the way in which people report may be different, but we will, while we're focused on strategies on the front end of the application, on the back end, we will be asking for disaggregated reporting on utilization, on who exactly were hired for these projects, all the way down to the subcontractors. And so, and there will be the random verifications to ensure it's, and I know that I know that this is, at least I think this will relate to the farm workers, that and I think there's probably more there that needs to happen given the prevalence of wage theft, but around just the 2385 and then meeting the minimum of the PCEF payment requirements. So those will be tracked on the back end, and yet we know that we're going to learn. I know that there's going to be more we're going to need to do there because I presume we'll see that there's shortcomings there. The next question in this section, and this is if your project construction is below 350,000. So remember, above 350,000, we're requiring prevailing wage. But if you're below 350,000, we wanted to give an incentive for paying prevailing wage. And so we ask, will you pay prevailing wage for those on this project where trades have a prevailing wage defined? So that's yes, no. And then the last question in this section, and I'll pause after this question, is if you're not paying prevailing wage, and again, that's for those below 350, if you're not paying prevailing wage, which of the following will you require for workers on this project? So not including the applicant organization. So we're not asking about the nonprofit itself, but we're asking about, what are they going to require in their contracts as they subcontract the contracting efforts? Are they going to require health insurance, paid time off, retirement contribution, other family-friendly practices? None of the above, other. And so this is for, again, so we wanted to make sure we captured those suite of various ways you can address benefits. Okay, I want to pause before I move to the next section and see if there are any questions here. And not to say we can't revisit them, we will revisit them as it relates to scoring, but just want to pause. All right, and I should acknowledge in the
sorry, this is Ramsey. I had a question on the pay time off. and or sick leave. So it excludes organizations with six, oh, sorry, read that wrong. Just wanted to clarify. I think this is a question I raised last time, but I think, sorry, this clarifies more.
Yeah, this was just the reason we said excluding is on the sick leave, because if you have 6 or more staff, you're required to, by state law, provide sick leave in the Portland area. I think it's 10 or more outside of Portland. And thank you, Andrea, for that, for some of that detail. Okay. All right.
Is it?
We'll move on to the next section.
Oh, okay.
All right. So physical capital improvement or install. So section 2 is for projects with a physical or capital improvement on a single site with a construction budget, hard and soft costs of $500,000 or greater. And so here, this is where we get into a greater level of detail, because at that level, we're saying, if you're going to propose a project with that kind of funding, we expect you to come into your proposal with a contractor identified so that we can actually score the contractor on these elements. And so we expect you to name your contractor. We expect you to identify whether your contractor is a minority-owned contractor, a women-owned contractor, a POC-owned contractor, a women-owned contractor. So we expect you to speak to, what is the ownership of the farm and does it meet our diverse contractor definitions. And then we expect you to describe the contractor's prior record of performance, utilizing diverse locally based subcontractors and a strategy to do so on this project. And lastly, we also expect them to list this table below where they describe their commitments to utilizing diverse subcontractors. So the first question is about who's your contractor on the project, and then what's their record of performance on these various elements, and then are they going to subcontract? What's the total estimated budget for the contract in the project? What percentage are they going to do as the prime or the general contractor, and what are they going to subcontract? And of that they subcontract, what of that is going to go to diverse subcontractors? So there's a level of detail in questions we ask, and the reason we're getting to this level of detail is that we're expecting you to come in with a commitment with a contractor as part of your application. And so the next section that we'll get to is around the workforce. But I want to pause here before we start asking the questions around the workforce and see other questions, this first set of questions that would be asked. Robin.
Yeah, did you get any, for lack of a better word, pushback on the assumption that at $500,000 or more, they will have identified who that contractor is?
This was one of those that we're going to see in the first year. I think the feedback that we got, we tried a few different things. We started with groups and started with 750,000. We said, how do you feel? And they're like, I think that's doable. So what if we lowered it to 500,000? Like, I think we could get a few bids. I don't know about a commitment. And then we went to other groups and we started with 500,000. They're like, we think that's doable. So this is one of those, I don't think there's a perfect sense. I think there is 750,000 is a number. I mean, I think 750,000 is a number that exists out there as a threshold for which I know certainly Prosper Portland and others as they're sponsoring projects. It's a number that exists out there. So I think there is a desire I will acknowledge that, our contractor group was like 750,000 already exists in sort of the ethos around a threshold. So you should stick with that. But there was an acknowledgement that these numbers there isn't necessarily a solid grounding other than there's a feeling that below 500 that'd be too low. And so we just try to push it as low as we thought, before folks said, so it's imperfect because at least we wanted to be able to capture some of that information. So I think that what we'll see is some folks may, I don't know entirely how that'll play out, but so I just wanted to, no one gave really any firm sort of, this is a strong rationale for staying with 500,000 versus going to 750. And I know our inclination was, the more that we move it, there's information we lose. But at the same end, whether that from an implementation perspective, I think there's a TBD out there. All right. Okay.
Sam, it looks like you
The next
have a question. Sorry.
Can I
Oh,
answer
sorry.
that real quick? I was going to say, I think we might think about raising that in in future years, but since our cap is $1 million this year, it feels like 500,000 is a good level to start collecting this information for the first year, since we do cap out at $1 million.
Michael. All right, so the next section is inclusive workforce. So the first question here is we expect you to identify the contractors, organization, non-trades workforce diversity. So this was in recognition that yes, the trades and those that are doing the labor matter, but it's also, we want to also focus on the back office, and ownership is an element of that's already captured earlier, but what does the back office look like? You know, how are you cultivating your management staff, your office or support staff? So we asked this set of questions here in this table, and this was in response to the feedback that we got from the committee earlier, that we added this as part of the first set of draft grant criteria. The next question that we ask is that we ask you to describe the contractor's record of performance recruiting, retaining, and advancing diverse workers, including apprentices, as well as include their strategies to do so on this project. This third question, and we did get feedback from committee members on this recently after we sent this out. So I expect that there'd be a revision here, but I wanted to share based on what we sent out. We ask, identify whether apprenticeship utilization on this project will meet maximum journey apprentice ratios for each apprenticeable trade. So I think just the context here is that there are limits set by I want to say boldly, please correct me if I'm wrong, the Bureau of Labor and Industries, that describes what is the maximum amount of hours that apprentices can do relative to journey level workers in a given trade. And the idea being that you don't want to substitute out, apprentices are cheaper, lower cost, and so you don't want a contractor to substitute out apprentices for journey level and have 4 apprentices for 1 journey level. So the question here that we had originally framed, the expectation was that, would you at least go to the maximum? Would you use as many apprentices as possible? And so what based on feedback, and Ramkesh, I don't know if you're going to speak to this. Maybe I'll just turn it to you to speak to this.
Yeah, I think my feedback is I would definitely understand from community how complicated this question would be or how you would answer this. And I think there is already guidance from Bully. It is a requirement. I think it could be just a requirement rather than a question for PCEF. I think it is something that I think, PCEF should track in some kind of level, making sure that there's proper ratios. The reality is, like, if say, for whatever reason, a contractor would utilize 80% apprentices on a project, or they just work off ratio. So in that scenario, if I were, and Michael, maybe you'd explain this one better, but if I were an electrician or a plumber and there were not enough journey level workers, it's no longer a training program. So there's some real health and safety issues if I'm learning on the job. And so those hours are no longer being tracked, so that then it creates a barrier for those workers to accumulate those apprenticeable hours to graduate to journey level status. In addition to that, when you do see off ratios, those apprentices in theory now deserve to be paid the journey level rate. So it is, again, if folks aren't following the letter of the law, I think the remedy here is those workers are paid the journey level rate. So that, I think it tries to address a historical challenge in the conversation around putting the investments in training folks. And, part of that is, if you're going to work and learn, you'll be paid less than a journey level rate. But in this scenario where, you're just an apprentice and there are no journey level workers, the ding for contractors to try to comply to the law is you have to pay them the journey level rate. Michael, I don't know if you'll capture this better. I do have some comments, just wanted to highlight again to my BIPOC question earlier, but since we're on this question, I thought I'd just address it as you're on this topic.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Ramkesh.
I don't know what more I can add to that. From my experience, contractors tend to maximize their use of apprentices up and to the maximum of whatever trade allows for the maximum apprentice to journeyman or journeyperson level. But so I'm just not sure that we need to worry about that because it is law, right? Like it's almost more of an informational point than a question, I think, at this point. It's more of like, you know, try to use as many apprentices as you can for workforce development. But, you know, don't break the law, maximize your use. But that often happens anyway, right? So I guess I wouldn't be too worried about it up until we see a problem with it.
So, Ramses, is your hand still up from earlier, or is that you had a follow up?
Oh, sorry. I was just hand up follow up. I think all I would say, just to wrap my thoughts, in the event that it is a problem and it is happening, and apprentices aren't being paid the journey level rate, that's considered a form of wage theft. But that's all I have to say on that.
Okay, thank you. I would love to follow up as we check in just the nuance between bully enforcement versus having as a requirement here in our program. So we'll follow up on that. But Jeffrey, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I echo both what Ramses and Michael said. Like I said, it's kind of very self-regulated. I'm currently have a kind of a unique situation right now to where I'm on a project where we have a lot of apprentices right now, and we are overpaying them because of the law. And the main reason for that is because of the lack of diversity in the trades. And we've personally have got people into the union to start training them because of that lack of diversity. So, like as they're saying, you know, it's nothing I think we need to track because it's already being done. But that's just one aspect of it. Is we keep into consideration that a lot of the trades are not diverse, and a lot of the diversity that we're looking for is going to be through apprenticeships. So we should particularly look for apprentices to see the new diversity that we're looking for in the industry.
Thank you. So I want you all to hold on to that point as we come back to the scoring criteria, because I think based on that feedback, we would propose we're going to probably take this question out, and as we scroll down, you'll see sort of where we want to make sure we're capturing that information. So the next question is identify workforce utilization commitments for the proposed project in the table below. Describe how these estimates are generated. So the description would happen here, but you would describe for your apprentices on the project, what are the percentage of hours that are being done by people of color, percentage of hours that are being completed by women, people of color, the percentage of hours that are done by white women, and percentage of hours other priority populations, and there's total unduplicated hours to priority populations because there's duplication. And then there's probably a fifth one here if we remove that question up top around total apprenticeable hours. And the same goes for the journey level table below, total journey level hours. So that way we get a sense for what ultimately is in their proposal, their total apprenticeship utilization. As you think about that question, when we get to the scoring criteria, I want to check in again, but just want to acknowledge that's where one change would exist. If we could make that change if we wanted to still track from an application perspective how and score it. So when we get later, if we remove the scoring, we could remove, we don't have to worry about changes, but if we want to track in the proposal, how many apprenticeship hours are they proposing? And I'm questioning here, what I'm hearing here is they're always going to maximize their apprenticeship hours, then maybe that's a moot point, but Ramses.
Yeah, I'm willing to engage in that question. I think the only thing I want to just highlight for our committee members here, you know, and again, I think this might be a question if we just really fully, for the sake of simplicity, but I think it's a question to revisit next year for sure, is the questions that we're asking here for apprentice number 1 and even junior level for I guess for both sections for apprentice and junior level, it's again in a POC framework. So again, it's just not aligned with I think our BIPOC explicit values. So there's, I think, not a consistency, but then I think it even raises the question, what is the difference between BIPOC and POC? And I think, I think as we've been kind of engaging this conversation together, I think what we were trying to recognize originally in the values of calling out explicitly BIPOC is just calling out the unique challenges for Black and Indigenous community members versus, I think, the catch-all POC terms. I think it's something that we should definitely digest on, and what does that mean for the construction industry at all? I don't want to make this too super complicated, but I know as we've had conversations around just harassment in the workplace and how it looks different based on race, I think I just wanted to just note that for our committee members. I see Jeffrey's hands up, so I'll stop.
Yes, I'm gonna say Sam.
I was gonna flesh out sort of the discussion for just the committee. The discussion really here was to be more specific with it was we asked specifically about hours to people of color, but should we separate out and ask percentage of hours that are going to go to Black people, percentage of hours that are going to go to Indigenous people, and then percentage of hours that would go to people of color, sort of exclude, at that point I would assume would be the balance of, and that was that there was I think Ramses, Michael, we all connected and Janet connected yesterday and talked this one through, and it was, there's many ways to approach this, and it was just, I think it's well worth a continued debate, but it was, can at an application phase, is it the signal that we're sending in terms of wanting to see that from even a proposal phase, that disaggregated goals versus, what kind of resolution does a contractor who would be providing this information to the nonprofit, what kind of resolution do they have in their workforce? And that tension between, can they have that information, or do we need to force them to have that information and send the signal? So there's just this tension back and forth that we spoke to, and I think industry-wise right now, a lot of the conversation is focused on what's your percentage of people of color. On the back end, we do disaggregate the data. So I don't want to mistake sort of the application here and what folks, but it's an important piece, what we asked for here. But on the back end, we do disaggregate the data. We will disaggregate it. So I want to be clear there that we will capture that data disaggregated, but on the front end, do we ask it? And particularly, do we ask it in light of the fact that we can't score that difference? That was one of those areas that you can't provide particular points, but do you ask it to send a clear signal that we want to see this? So that was the debate. And please, if I didn't do it justice, Ramses, Michael, step in.
I just like to clarify as, I think we do want to ask the question. I guess my question is, do we want to actually include table 1C, or do we want to just ask question 4 in a broader term, like, what are your commitments? How would you describe your commitments and and your estimates and how you generated those? I don't know if we want to just ask a more general question year 1 and then get more into it for year 2. We're only asking this for over 500,000, right? Yep. So I guess that's the big question. Kind of, do we keep table 1C? In my head, the question is, do we keep table 1C in there, or do we just ask number 4 in a more general sort of way without hard numbers attached?
Jeffrey, did you still have a question or thoughts that you wanted to share?
Oh, no, not really. I'm good.
Okay.
I think Shanice was up first.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just a question to the committee, and as Michael shared his comments, I'm resonating. But as we talk about the utilization, between apprentice and journey level folks on a project about grant criteria, but in the context of a grant being accepted, and I think that common practice to how funds or projects might be impacting beneficiaries, and that feels like this priority population in the context of journey level folks and apprentice folks on our project we could potentially gauge some of that in more detail in an evaluation space after we've approved a grant. That makes sense. And I resonate with a more broader descriptor with an indicator that we'll do this potentially in an evaluation phase, if that makes sense. So giving the heads up that's going to be an expectation in the long haul. So that's my thought and question, I guess.
I want to acknowledge, Shanice, that I think you broke up for me for a good bit in the beginning. So for Ramses or Michael, you picked it up. I just want to call that out. Sorry.
Technology. Shanice, maybe if I could, what I think I heard you say is that you are, you would be supportive of the idea of removing Table 1C and going with a more kind of a more flexible or a more broad kind of question, but making sure that there was language somewhere in the application that made it clear to the folks who were applying that there was an expectation about their hiring practices related to apprentice and journey level utilization in these different categories. Does that capture most of it?
Exactly.
Okay. Robin?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about this question as a grant writer's perspective, and to kind of chime off, I think it was RJ Ramos's comments earlier. You know, I would think that this project is probably going to be at least 6 months out between the time I fill out this application and when it happens. And I think it's going to be just very difficult to predict with a lot of detail what type of, utilization or different population sets you might be able to recruit for the projects. That said, I'm not in the construction industry, and so I might be off base, but just strictly from a grant writer's perspective, I think it's going to be very difficult to nail down these numbers because there's just so much time and variables, between now and then. So I'm for kind of keeping this, higher level. Two ideas that, just kind of throw out there. One is that, maybe we can ask for more detailed information, but make it optional. So those organizations that can provide that level of detail, please do. But those that don't, they don't necessarily be penalized or feel required that they have to. And then the other option is that maybe there's something that we can incorporate, some goals or some objectives into the grant agreement, which will be like, 3-4 months further along. And then people can begin to start sizing up, their labor and whatnot, and maybe in a better position to state some of the goals and objectives that they can pursue with the PCEF funds. So just some ideas.
Thank you, thank you, Robin, and thank you, Shanice. I think before I turn it to Ramses and Maria, I would acknowledge that one of the early grant agreements would be an expectation to see their sort of workforce and contractor equity plan and work on developing that, so that we're pretty clear as we're managing them that how are they going to go out to, and it's certainly relevant on the less than 500,000 to make sure how are they going to go out to contract with their entities, but I want to simmer and think a little bit about that in these other areas. So you Ramses, or I don't know who was first, but
I think Maria was first. Sorry. Yeah, Maria.
Thanks. Those comments are helpful. I think applicants, once they receive the grant, should demonstrate their utilization commitments and maybe receive ongoing capacity building on how to better meet those commitments. There was a comment earlier about how we use the label POC and, you know, BIPOC. I don't think we should use them interchangeably. And I think, you know, based on Joanne's comments too and other conversations we had, if we really intend to change outcomes for certain communities, like maybe we have to name those in our metrics and our evaluation criteria. Like if we want to up, you know, the participation and better employment outcomes for Black communities, we have to single out the B and commit to the B. And not just lump them in as POC, because I know there's lots of groups who are specifically calling for like the detachment of the B in the POC and just making sure that we don't, you know, get them mixed up or don't forget that the B stands for something, and that's for our Black communities.
Ramses?
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of respond to some of the comments. I know, like for Shanice's question and suggestion around like evaluating after the award is set. My understanding is there's no real evaluation post award for set goals around utilization, especially if there's a evaluation for BIPOC. Is that correct? Like I think we're after an award set.
When you say evaluation, in the sense, what we do is what the project actually does. We will be tracking what actually happens on a project. So we'll track the outcomes of what happens on a project, and then in turn, so you'll have the outcomes, and that'll be a bigger conversation to respond to that. And then there's an award has been awarded by City Council. They have whatever they have in their application. Then we're going to contract with them, and in the grant agreements themselves, we're going to work through, and it may be one of their first deliverables is their detailed, you know, if they've got it as one of their strategies, they're going to go reach out to one of our culturally specific contractor support agencies to find contractors. One of our first deliverables for them will be, you know, you go do that and have your plan and come back, and that's one of your early deliverables. So it won't necessarily be a statement. I mean, I think we've got to still tease that out in terms of what would materialize in one of those early deliverables, in terms of whether that is a goal for that project, and it could be.
And then in terms of like, I think how projects, what types of projects we fund, like, is it right to assume that we'll probably fund projects that are likely 6 months out, like I think Robin has suggested, but it could also be projects that are already on, like in process right now. Like it could be in the middle of a project that are asking for additional funds. So, you know, I think I feel like the way the RFP has been designed thus far, it's not very strict, whether it's a shovel-ready project versus a project that could start in 6 months versus whether it's already ongoing. So.
That's a very valid point. Actually, that was one of the feedback that did come through in our discussions with our nonprofit partners, that this 500,000 may just be, or $1 million may just be a piece of a $30 million project that they're piecing together, and this is either the first money in or somewhere in that capital stack. Alternatively, I think Ramses, like you said, a project may already be either in construction or near construction. It's in some various phase, and they're submitting a PCEF grant in order to an affordable housing project, and they want to put solar panels on the top of it. So it may already be in motion when they submit the grant. So you're right in that projects will be in various stages from prior to implementation to in the middle of and post implementation.
I had kind of a follow-up question to Robin's question, or maybe his comment. As it's currently constructed, these questions, if someone, even if you don't respond to answering all of these questions, the application is still considered responsive. You could either still get points, some points, maybe not full points, but you still get points, correct? Like the application will still be accepted regardless of the level of how these questions are answered. Is that correct? Is that an accurate statement?
It's funny, we haven't fully discussed that, but I'd say yes. I'd say yes to that. And we'll see the scores, so you'll get a sense for how many points these materialize in. But nonetheless, folks generally want to be able to answer these questions. But the first question in terms of being able to name your contractor does level to these other questions. So if you didn't name your contractor, whether it's a good question on whether if you didn't name your contractor, but you put all these various goals in here, I don't know how that would be. We need to, I don't think we'd evaluate that. That's the supposition is you have to have your contractor in order to be able to state these goals. So it would trickle through the rest of these questions here. Thanks for this section.
Thanks.
Michael?
So I guess I would like to see something along the lines of number 4 being like, describe your workforce utilization commitments for BIPOC people by contractors for the proposed project, and describe how these utilization commitments are generated, and your estimate or utilization estimates or commitments are generated, with the caveat that we are going to ask. I mean, I think we need to ask on the back end on reporting. It needs to be a BIPOC question. Absolutely needs to be a BIPOC question on the reporting side. So still letting table 1C go, but making sure that BIPOC is front and center in identifying workforce utilization commitments in a bigger, higher level question. Whew, I don't think I said that really well. I'm kind of tired.
No, it's, I think the question I have, and I want to make sure, because what I don't want to, I appreciate this, and I think it's hard to fully tease out on the fly all the pieces of it, but what I'm worried, and I'm just going to flag this right now, is the initiative calls out people of color, communities of color, as it relates to the workforce benefits. As it relates to workforce benefits, the initiative calls out people of color, women, those with disabilities, people with disabilities, and otherwise chronically underemployed. And so,
and other historically marginalized communities.
And so we'd have to be able to ask the question in a way. I mean, so we can ask the question, like we can say BIPOC. Like I don't want to. I'm sensitive and be like, if I wouldn't, for instance, in this table, I wouldn't just say BIPOC, because just lumping them together, if you're gonna, in my opinion, if you're gonna say BIPOC, you got to separate it out, because the term has significance. So we could say, what are your either your strategy or utilization commitments for Black, Indigenous, people of color, but we also have to include women, the other priority, and the reason we have it here is other priority population, because that's and we have them described, but we'd have to include those, because I'm fairly confident, I have checked this, that is at the level of the code, and so because the code calls it out, we couldn't provide.
Yeah.
Not to say that's not something you shouldn't. Yeah, so maybe I'll just.
So maybe we can make table 1C into a question on number 4, like, like get all those things in there. Yeah.
I think we can do. I think we can do that. That in terms of making it more narrative form, we can do that. I think the assumption, and I'll let Janet chime in, because I imagine, imagine you've got thoughts here, Janet, is that sort of. It would be a consistent way to just speak to it, but I hear what you're saying is that just make it narrative form and let them answer relative to each of the commitments that they want to be able to state in their application.
Janet?
Yeah, the only thing, it was a thread back, so hopefully I can pull it out of my tired head here, but I just to clarify, yes, the reporting is disaggregated, so we would have that information. But there was a question somewhere back there that was about like, oh, we don't get stuff till the end. And I want to shine a light on that. That is not that we wait till the very end to get the data. The point is to be getting information on an ongoing basis and make those adjustments. And we have in those drafts of agreements, we can say what those consequences are. We can withhold payments if you're consistently not making those targets. we're going to have your record of performance. So when you come back next year and you're like, pick me, and you're like dreadful, you can be, you know, not eligible in the future. So I did want you to feel that, understand those mechanics and that consequence that you have access to.
Sorry, I forgot to raise my hand.
But if it's, did you have a response to what Janet said, Michael?
Yes, I do. I guess I'm not so much worried about punishment for not making utilization commitments that are required, right? So I'm not sure that punishment is. I kind of feel like, I don't know, like communities of color have been punished enough, right? So I'm not sure that punishment is like when punishment starts becoming what we do, it feels really pretty bad it feels really awful. But I think that we can ask what the utilization is. If they're not meeting it, that we can say, what can you do to improve this? And then look at progress over time, right? So if you're not meeting your utilization and you improve on it on this project, and then you get another project a year later as a contractor and you improve on it more, and you get another project 3 years from now and you're doing even better, that's what I would rather see than to see you didn't make your numbers this time, so we're not paying you, right?
You're spot on with that capacity building piece and that working with folks along the way. I just wanted to respond to the many people who've said like, oh, you know, we always hear good faith efforts and it's the same old, and you know, people are gonna make promises and not deliver. And just to know that if that were, you know, again, the way it's designed, it shouldn't play out that way because look who's in the driver's seat. But just to know there's a menu of ways that we can be responding, including the High Roads Committee and all that. So I'll stop with.
Yeah, and I'm going to try to move on, but Megan, let's I know you had your hand up for a bit, so.
Well, this is a really great conversation. I'm learning a lot, and my comment is really not exactly following all this, although I do really appreciate the focus on what do you all keep saying, rising to the top or something, the race to the top, and like figuring out how to do that correctly, especially given comments like RJ Ramos said earlier about how we might not have the people in place and different projects may end up competing at the same time for a limited workforce. So I think figuring out ways that we can keep pushing people is really important. So I'm really grateful for all the thoughtful things. And I'm also really supportive of efforts to disaggregate, sorry, that's big word there, to separate out, like to understand Black and Indigenous impacts. So, but doing it in a way that maybe is part of that race to the top thing. So, but my comment really is wearing my urban agriculture hat. Since thinking about Faith's comment, I'm thinking, what's my role? And it seems it's probably not likely many urban agriculture construction projects would meet the $500,000 threshold, but I did want to point out that the words apprentice and journey level, or I guess I wanted to ask, like, these are very specific to particular workforces that have those labels and like these things. And people who might be building farms and garden beds and stuff might not have, like, those words are not the right words, and they don't have a very formalized like workforce. I mean, there is in some ways. Renfis was talking about kind of maybe more commercial scale ag and farm workers, but a lot of what happens on like small scale urban ag is more informal than all that. And so I'm just curious if, can we have other words too?
I would love to hear Renfis's comments, and because this is the journey level, that was the hope and thing, because it's not just journeys, it's like journey level, which is my understanding is that it's like those that are not training more or less, but I know that doesn't necessarily land.
Yeah, I mean, the word apprentice, I guess, could resonate, but I just wonder, yeah, just being really clear in the language that like, or whatever word makes sense for your organization and your sector that you work in, and maybe giving a little description around like, intern, or I don't know, there's other words. Yeah, I can't off the top of my head think of what would be a journey level, but yeah. So just trying to make sure that we make sure there's flexibility, and so that if people aren't in these sectors, that they see themselves in here and understand how to respond to this question.
Like farmer versus farmhand.
Yeah, I don't really like those words either, but yeah, just that. And again, in urban agriculture, those aren't always even the words used. Like sometimes it is apprentice or intern, or you know, like like we could ask Mudbone Grown and Zanger and stuff the words they use.
Just to quickly respond, my understanding is that the agriculture sector or regenerative ag doesn't apply for this section.
Well, I'm thinking of, because this is construction, and there may be projects that are like large scale farm or garden construction, like lots of building of garden beds and putting in water infrastructure to lay out farms. And that work could be done by farmers, whatever the word would be. So that's kind of what I was imagining in this, not so much actual farming, but more construction, because that's the type that would reach a $500,000 level. But maybe I'm misunderstanding that.
I believe you understood that correctly, Megan.
So it's really just a ask to maybe have other words that indicate a broader, expansive table of, you know, type of work thing. And I am happy to talk offline about brainstorming that or connecting to some organizations that might be able to provide some ideas for that.
Yeah, that would be great. Jeffrey?
Yeah, I guess my question is, kind of go back to what Janet was talking about. What is PCEF's role in helping contractors hit these numbers? Like if they're saying, hey, what you're asking for us to do doesn't exist, does PCEF have a role in that, or is it solely on the contractor to make sure he hits those numbers? I'm just kind of curious about that. So it'd be a situation like, hey, such as RJ Ramos thought, I couldn't find enough women. Have you talked to organ trades women? Like, have you given them suggestions on where they can go? And see and make sure they actually are making the effort to, reach out to these communities. And then, if that doesn't work, then okay, we realize you did your best to hit these numbers. Just it doesn't exist as you claim. So how are we verifying that? I guess is my question.
I think at a starting place, and I want to acknowledge this is an area we're going to learn a lot about in terms of what is the right level of touch as project managers that we do and engage, and how do we support nonprofits and hence their contractors in meeting these. And so I don't want to pretend to know the full answers of how that relationship is going to work and where are all those various resources and when we check in on how a strategy is being implemented well. So I think that's still we're gonna be teasing that out over the next month or so, and we'll at least have something within the grant agreements around the requirements around this. But the expectation is that is an element. So I guess I just want to acknowledge, I don't exactly know whether that's something that we expect to see, because as part of their strategies, they're directly working with organ tradeswomen or constructing or brothers. I'm not sure. We still need to tease out what that looks like, and what our role is in doing that. So I think there's still some more conversations to be had there, and actually we're going to be trying to put pen to paper on that pretty soon here. So it's an imperfect answer, but I think in large part, Jeffrey, that's the reason why we ask applicants to tell us what their goals are going to be, so that we're sort of not coming out with this, give us 30% when 30% may not be reasonable for this sector.
Ranfis and Michael both had, but Ranfis's hand disappeared. I did just want to do a time check. It's 8:34, and we do have some, I need to save a little bit of time at the end to sort of just go over next steps. So, but Michael, Ranfis, your hand disappeared, so we're gonna.
So I guess I'll just say this really quickly, which is that every trade has slightly different requirements for what an apprentice looks like, has different requirements for what its apprenticeship looks like. But for trades with formal apprenticeships, there's these things called joint apprentice training centers, right? And they're both union and non-union. And they report disaggregated information to BOLI. So you can actually get what the current available numbers are for women, for Black people, for Indigenous people, for defined by both race, by sex. You can get all that disaggregated information for what's currently available. If you're looking to set up numbers to reach, right? So if the plumbing trades are 17% women, that gives you an idea of, for apprenticeships, they don't track journey level, but they do track apprenticeships. So that'll give you an idea of what's available out there for contractors to access.
And please.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Megan's question. I'm happy and interested, like, to think about other job sectors on this, because most of our framework and energy has been on construction, and it is a key important part. But just reflecting on that, I'm as a committee member, I'm very much interested in that. I think to the comments around this dynamic around, and I feel like this is like a glass half empty, glass half full kind of dynamic, because I think what I'm hearing, from some of our contractors is like that, PCEF is forcing specific goals that might not be attainable, and I think from my perspective, it doesn't seem like we're forcing any particular goal, but we are asking folks to disclose or try to determine their own goals for these projects. I think for me the North Star is, I think no contractor, no one union is going to solve the challenges around workforce equity. It's going to be a systems change, and it's much bigger than PCEF. But I feel like we're charged to control what we can control and send that signal. And I think what I heard from Michael's point, like, I think contractors and unions and non-union apprenticeship programs play a big role in setting the recruitment, training, retaining practices for the industry. And I think, I would hope that PCEF can be a resource, one, to send the market signal, but even provide the support to address some of those historical barriers and just, recruiting, training, hiring, keeping folks on the job. But, I think this does feel like a longer term conversation that I think we're just scratching the surface. And, my role as a committee member has just been, from my expertise, is just highlighting that workforce voice, but it's got to be the whole industry coming together, talking about these barriers. And so I hope this is a longer conversation. I can't do justice right now, but and I think same goes for these other industries that we just haven't had the time or energy yet to fully flesh out either. So it does feel overwhelming, but I think I really value your questions here, Jeffrey, because I think it's a question that I think we definitely need to, I hope PCEF can play a role in making this achievable.
Thanks, Francis.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move now into the scoring changes. We've talked a lot about these, but it reflects that it'll play out at least. So I think we've touched on many of these things, but I'll just start reading through them. Projects with single site construction budget less than 500,000 will be scored purely on the strategies in the contractor, around the contractor, subcontractor workforce diversity, rather than on commitments or known contractors. We remove points for FTE per dollar invested, because we're no longer asking about how many worker hours you're creating. We remove points associated with non-construction related contracting, and we remove points for inclusive workforce for projects that do not have a single site more than $500,000. So simplified, originally there's 4 tables. Now we're down to 2 tables. This is again for only 2 tables is again if you're below $500,000. And so the first thing is, what's your strategy for recruitment and utilization of diverse local contractors? Full points if applicant has a strong strategy for recruitment and utilization of diverse local contractors. We're getting this point conversation here soon in a follow-up. But what's your for projects less than 350,000? Does the project pay prevailing wage to workers in trades for which a prevailing wage is defined? And it's sort of a yes, no, you do it or you don't in terms of getting the full points. And then you either get this set of points for projects below 350,000, or you get this set of points. So for projects less than 350,000, that are not requiring prevailing wage, what benefits do you provide? And to get the full set of points, you're at least providing health insurance benefit plus one additional benefit, whether that's paid time off, retirement, family-friendly practices. That's the full set of points. We move to, and so we'll talk, the reason there's 3 possible points, we'll come back to this, but because this actually isn't as accurate based on what we're presenting under the table. So I want to come back to this, the points here on this one. This next table here is for projects that do have a single, at a single site, at least $500,000 of investment of PCEF funds for construction. So you get full 6 points if you got a strong strategy for recruitment and utilization of diverse local contractors. And so to have that, and to get the full points, you've got to have secured a diverse, so your prime contractor has to be a diverse contractor, your general contractor, and they've got to have a good record of utilizing diverse local subcontractors. So that's the full set of points. And then it sort of tiers down from there in terms of the next set of points would be you don't have a diverse general contractor, but you have a white general contractor, but they've got a really good subcontracting goals. So tiers down. The next criteria is your percentage of total contract dollars reaching diverse subcontractors. So this is that table that said how much are you subcontracting and how much of that is reaching diverse subcontractors. So this is one of those that are comparative across applications. So if you're in the top 20% of applications in terms of your subcontracting utilization goals, you get the full points, 3 points. The next, my fire alarm is going off in the house. Katie, we talked about this happening.
Oh no.
I got a faulty fire alarm. It's not happening here, but I'm watching Tara probably freak out. Okay. I may have to hop off now. So apprenticeship utilization is the next one. And so this is one that I wanted, we would shift the question, and it's a question back out to the committee, is whether, originally we scored 2 points. I'm gonna have to head out and address this. So maybe you'll pick up.
Maybe, yeah. And maybe actually Janet, you could pop in and take over since you've been working on this workforce section so closely. And we are nearing the end of our meeting, but it would be great to get through this section.
Sure. Though I think I'm not 100% sure where we landed on some of the things in the conversation that are shifting, and this point table is based on coming into the meeting. Sam, welcome back. Good timing. And he's smiling.
Our fire alarms have been going off randomly, and the baby just went down, and so I wanted to unplug it, but it happened to be the neighbors.
Oh no, it's Katie's fault. It started at her house.
It did start at my house.
Okay, sorry.
Go ahead and pick it up, because I was just saying I'm actually needing to think about how this looks different based on tonight's conversation. So that was as far as we got.
Yeah, so the general gist is if what we're hearing from committee members is that apprenticeship utilization is not a concern, that you are going to see high apprenticeship utilization to the max, then we could take this points out and redistribute it. So if really apprenticeship utilization wasn't a thing that we needed to incentivize, that it was already going to happen on these types of projects, projects single site above 500,000, we can remove these set of points.
And just the historical note, the way that showed up there was stakeholder input about, because at the journey level, we're not very diverse in the trades, the way it's when you get your apprentices in and diverse apprentices in is how we start building that pipeline. And some of the agreements that we've been seeing emerge in the region, that was one of the things they were pushing. So early on in conversations when folks were saying, use the work that's been done to date, make sure we've got these good apprentice utilizations, up to the maximum, that's where that came from. But, we've got talented committee members who have lived experience to tell us how to do that differently, but that's how it showed up.
Next score was inclusive apprenticeship recruitment. So this is that you've got a good record of diverse apprenticeship utilization and a strong strategy to recruit diverse apprentices. And that's 2 points. we got 3 points for inclusive apprenticeship utilization commitment. So the first one is just what's your strategy and what's your record on inclusive apprenticeship recruitment. So next point is, okay, what are your actual commitments? And this is again one of those scores that's relative to all the applications, that if you're in the highest 20% of applications for the diversity of your apprentices utilized on your project, you get the full 3 points. So we want to, we want to incentivize folks to be in that highest, but you're relative to the others in the pool. And then the last two set of points, the category criteria are non-apprentice. There's a non-apprentice workers recruitment strategy. So this is your journey level or other workers, which we'll figure out that term, Megan. And what's your recruitment strategy? Do you have a strong record in a recruitment strategy? And then for the same level, those same workers, what are your commitments? And so we've got 2 points here that if you're in the highest 20% of applicants for diversity of non-apprentice workers, so workers that aren't being trained, but workers that are masters in their profession, then you get the full 2 points. So that's the section, and I think, I'm happy to go to budget here, but I wanna pause there because I know we certainly do have this ask on whether this criteria. We've heard some feedback that it might not make sense, and I want to check in on. Affirm that or not affirm that.
And Janet had her hand up, but I also just wanted to make sure that for folks who have not been really involved in these conversations, that everybody did understand that the $500,000 threshold is not the amount of the grant. It's the construction budget on a single site. So you could have $1 million grant to do 50 weatherization projects, and none of them are going to be a single site. 500. So just want to make sure that was clear. So those projects that don't have a single site will just pretty much be scored on their strategy for recruitment, for inclusive recruitment and utilization, and for whether or not they pay prevailing wage, and if they don't, then if they have provide benefits. Just kind of the summary of that section, because now it feels like so long ago because we went through this longer section. Janet and Robin both put your hands up, and I didn't see who was.
If we do get rid of the table, we need to be very clear in the narrative instruction that percentages do need to be given, because that's how we're scoring. So just want to flag that.
Yeah. Robin?
Yeah, just a clarifying question. When you say this is a binary score, so they either get 2 points or 0 points?
That's right.
Okay.
And so if we redid this, I want to acknowledge that this was based on, originally the question was focused on sort of, are you hitting this ratio, which is a complicated thing in and of itself? Are you hitting this Bowley ratio? Are you hitting the max but not exceeding it? Then we got feedback that folks, if anything, folks always hit the max, and if anything, they're going to be at fault for exceeding it. And so we're saying, okay, we're no longer going to ask about the ratio. We would ask, but is there still value in providing points and asking about utilization? We just have to adjust that. So is there still value in points about asking for utilization? And if we did so, I think, Robin, to your point, we would actually adjust this. So it would be something like one of these other ones that are relative, like, are you in the highest 20% of applicants to get the full points in terms of your utilization of apprentices? Because we want to, the question was, there's a thinking we need to incentivize that. So anyways, I just want to put that back to the committee members and see if that, and specifically Ramphis, Jeffrey, Michael on this.
Jeffrey?
Well, from my point of view, usually contractors are looking for the best people to get the work done. They're trying to push the work. So they try to get journey level people that are very good at what they do, that are going to get the work pushing more than anything. I actually would like to hear from Michael and Ramphis' point of view, if from their lived experience, if that has never been an issue with apprenticeship utilization rate. Because from my background, we use a lot of apprentices because we're trying to diversify the market. So maybe my point of view might be a little skewed because of that. So I was not aware that this might be a thing that's just standard in industry. I know obviously apprentices get paid less, but you know, usually they're green. So they're having to learn and they're not as productive as well. So I guess I'll open the floor to either Michael or Ramphis if they could provide a little bit more insight.
Ramphis?
Yeah, I think it's ratios. I think are important. I don't think it's something that needs to be scored. I think this could be a score that gets redistributed somewhere else. But I think I've been in some oversight committees where, I've seen different stakeholders be able to flag that there's improper ratios between junior level and apprentice workers. I think it's just a difference between just flagging it.
Let me make a change here. I'm going to make a change here. And I just made it in real time here because this is closer to what I think this is closer to what I think with the change we would make. And I want to ask it in regards to if we would change this so that it's apprentice utilization rate, and 2 points would be if you're in the highest 20% of applications for apprentice utilized on a project. So I'm going to remove the ratio thing because I think I hear the point about ratio that's not, but that would this change it that do we need to incentivize folks using more apprentices? Obviously not exceeding the maximum because that's a law, but more apprentices than less.
Once again, I mean, I've often come as a journey person. I've had more trouble with having too many apprentices signed for me and being out of ratio with too many, as opposed to not having enough. Occasionally, I only have one apprentice. I usually have two. I've had up to 6, which is crazy, but because 2 is the maximum legal limit. I mean, rarely is in my trade, in electrical trades, rarely is a journeyman working without an apprentice.
So if there's questions about this, we can do more homework here. I appreciate that there's questions even here. We'll do more homework on this, and I mean, and it may be that for now we've got it here, and it's going to be pending sort of teasing out this answer in the next week before we sort of come back to conclusion on this. But I think for what I'm hearing here, we've got to check in with a few others, and if you have suggestions on that, we'll take that offline just to check in on this question. But I think if there's not questions on this, I mean, if this is the place where if there aren't questions on other elements, we will commit to coming back to this one and teasing that out. But I want to make sure if there are other elements here that folks thought on it.
Robin?
Yeah, I'm not an expert in this stuff, but I'm just wondering if maybe there's another way of looking at this issue, making sure that there are apprentices in the pipeline, so to say. Maybe there's a different way of measuring this or incentivizing things other than utilization rate. So I don't know what that is. Is there a different way of looking at the box?
That is, I want to acknowledge that these questions collectively this section is a challenging section in the sense that these are full bodies of discussion that folks spend multiple years on teasing out, and so we're not going to be able to. I think to your point, Robin, as we get that data coming in, it's going to be incumbent on us that we're reflecting on that data in real time and talking through these strategies as we're seeing these projects happen and getting feedback back on sort of what is playing out in the strategies and what the market looks like. So I think that point that you're talking about around that apprenticeship pipeline, this is one way, and I'm sure there are others, and that's part of what we will. That's part of what I think is the journey that we've got to be committed to being on.
Sam, I just want to.
Jen, I really want to keep us. I'd really want to keep us going here if we can.
Yeah, it was just, if folks are struggling with this, the other option was that it's not something that we score. In some places, what you see is the requirement that you're a registered training agent and that you've got that apprentice plan. So if the struggle was on that scoring, it can move into the requirements instead of the scoring.
We'll come back to you all before, hopefully before Friday here on this, but it may be that this is a conversation piece we just bring back up as an update next week. All right. Marcus.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sorry, I just want to, happy to revisit this for another week. You know, as I'm looking at this, we've got like 3 different scores for utilization and commitments and recruitment and the rates. So I think just wanted to point that out. But yeah, I mean, happy to take this offline.
So we're at 8:56 and we've got, the next section was the budget section. I think what I'd like to do is, I'm wondering, I'm just trying to, I think the budget section is pretty simple and the changes were pretty simple there. So I think we could just email that section out and ask you all to review that and provide us feedback on that section. It is, I mean, to highlight at a high level, there are really very minimal changes to the budget section other than we removed the request for a percentage of funding estimate by funding type. So we're no longer saying how much of, so we removed the question and we made clarifying changes to the budget template. And on the scoring, we just reduced the overall points. So it's pretty simple. So I'll just share that and acknowledge that it's a simple section. So what I think we'll ask is that you all review that and provide us feedback over email. And I'd love to talk a little bit about the next steps here. But Katie, I want to say, is there something else that we're missing? Because I know we had quite a bit teed up here.
I don't think that there's anything else we're missing for today, except for, I guess, just to, in order to hit the timeline that we went over at the beginning, in the beginning of the meeting, we had hoped to be able to redraft, kind of like provide you all by the end of the week with kind of an updated draft application and scoring criteria for the large grants, in hopes that we could get approved the following week and start working on the RFP and for that section. So that's a little bit going into next steps, but I think that we might just need to add that we kind of need a specific plan maybe for the workforce section in there. Michael?
Would it be possible that you can redraft everything and for that little workforce section, give us maybe like 3 options? Like an option A, an option B, an option C. Because I think I could be wrong, but I think there's just kind of like one little sticking point in there that we're not sure about. So maybe like kind of the 3 big options that we all sort of presented. And then around we can get to like either 1, 2, or 3 and come up with that decision. And then we've got a final product to put out or final grant proposal to put out.
Yeah. Michael, I appreciate that. I think we can do that. I think we can put out a couple different iterations so that we can come back to you all next week and present something closer to so that we can get you all the final next week. So I want to share a little bit about sort of what those next steps do look like. So maybe just, well, I'll share the next steps and I'll jump into just a couple other updates so you all know that they're out there. The next meeting, what we'll do is that this Friday, we will send you all a cleaned up version of the scoring, the application questions and the scoring criteria for the large grant application. And in that, we will have a few options for a couple of the sticking points here in the workforce and contractor equity section, and we'll try to keep that simple in terms of those options. Next week, we're going to come back and we're going to have a committee discussion and where we hope to have a proposal in order to stay on that timeline to accept the draft large grant application scoring criteria. What this will allow us to do is go ahead and start working on finalizing that RFP. We'll also present to you all next week the draft planning grant application and scoring criteria, as well as the draft small grant application and scoring criteria. And I think I've got to acknowledge those are two sections. The small grant is largely, a lot of the changes and suggestions you made here are going to be directly applicable to the small grant. It'll be a teasing out and speaking to the scoring criteria. But the planning grant is where we will go through that in more detail, because that's an area that we haven't dug into. A lot of the changes and suggestions you all made here around the large grant will carry over in the small grant. The planning grant will be a little different. So we'll walk through those in detail next week, with the expectation that when we come back, in the hope maybe, that when we come back on our follow-up meeting in August, which we haven't scheduled yet, but hopefully that first week of August, that we would be able to potentially accept or discuss and propose or make a proposal to accept the planning grant application scoring criteria and the small grant application scoring criteria, so we can move those. So essentially, we're hoping to move the large grant, then come back and then present those other two and then move those. There's a piece here that I know staff, we're going to think through how we can share and present the requirements, the elements that would go into the grant agreements. And I'm thinking that we should be able to share some of that here on Friday with this, so you have that. But I know I want to just check back in with the team and make sure exactly how fleshed out we see that, or whether that's at what level we can share that. We think we can share that. In the next few weeks' time, we would, I think that the subcommittee that's been working on recruitment will be ready to present a candidate, a recommendation to you all in terms of the next steps around the recruitment of the next new committee member, as well as we should be able to bring bylaws as well within some of the next two meetings. So we're going to try to tease out which one of the meetings that makes sense in terms of just timing. And then just a quick update, a couple of quick updates is the letter to City Council was received well, and City Council will be, they are working on a response to that. So I want to acknowledge a thank you to everyone that worked on that in the committee. So we will hopefully have a response to that pretty soon here that I can share with you all. And then lastly is our application support grants are closing next Friday. We've received 33 or so applications so far, and just had a lot of really good uptake. And at the same time, we know there are many folks out there that have not applied. So just that is being received well. I'm sure there are pieces I'm missing, but I do know that we are past 9 now, and I want to respect folks' time. So I just wanted to, I'll stop there with a few of those updates and see if there are any closing comments folks want to share.
Robin?
Yeah, thanks. Great work. I know there's a lot of heavy lifting going on right now. I guess I'm going to ask if you guys can help us with our heavy lifting. It sounds like you're asking us to review a lot of documents in the next week or two. If you can kind of you don't have to do it right now, but just prioritize kind of which documents need our attention and what type of feedback you're looking for. Instead of just kind of saying, here are the documents, look at it and we'll talk. So some little bit of structure to help us kind of just prioritize things would be very helpful.
Yeah. We can certainly do that. I actually, just before I let you go, I did want to remind folks that to take the doodle poll so that we can schedule the meetings for August and September. And another, just a reminder also that there is a webinar about the application support grants this Friday. So if you know anyone or any organizations that might be interested in that information is on our website. And then I think we can certainly, some of the documents that we're going to be asking you to review are like the revised large grant application and scoring criteria, the whole thing. And then the same with the planning grant, though it is much, much shorter. And then there's the small grant. And really, I think what we would like to do there is just provide information about how it is different
because it is essentially a scaled down version of the large grant. And so we're taking all of the feedback that we got from the public and from the committee related to the, you know, changes to the small grant. And a lot of those are just kind of like transferring over into a scaled down version in the small grant application. And so I guess, does the committee, do you all feel like you need to review that that in its entirety now, or would you prefer that we just provide you kind of with how it is different, which would be shorter? There's no preference. We're not going to say.
I get my initial preference. Just tell us how we can help best.
Okay.
You guys are immersed with the paperwork and the documents, and I can't imagine. I don't know what they are and what type of feedback you're looking for. So, you know, just speaking for myself, let me know how I can try to help best.
Okay. Will do. Any other questions or comments before we call it a night?
When are you sending out the doodle poll?
It was in the last email that had the application material for this meeting. I can resend it though, Michael.
Yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
I got it. Thank you.
Awesome.
Really appreciate you all. Really, really, really appreciate you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, y'all.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.
Good night.
Good night, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting.